Okay, I have 7 o'clock on my phone, so we're going to get started. I'm going to call the meeting to order. The first order of business is action on the minutes from January 29th, 2025. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay. Okay, yeah, I will too. Wasn't here. So BFJ update, take it away.
Okay.
All you.
We've got, we're going to be able to do this in a slide presentation, but we do have hard copy to start with. And just the agenda, I just wanted to
Yes.
cover the agenda a little bit. We're going to go through, status and timeline. And we got a couple of questions on dates for the timeline. And then I'll give you a little bit property owner outreach. We've got a slide on that. We think we've met with the owners of about 2/3 of the property. And we think we're not going to get much of a response from Frontier. We've tried 2 or 3 times, as Abby knows, and we've tried the owner, the new owner of the gas station. They just haven't responded, but I think most of the owners we've talked to. So, and then we want to go into a discussion of the zoning ideas, and then a lot of this is Jonathan for presenting design, I would call initial design thoughts. And that leads me to next steps in the timeline, because we have a committee meeting with you March 26th. So what we're trying to do tonight is discuss the preliminary zoning ideas we have and the preliminary design ideas, and that they're just that, preliminary. But then on March 26th, Jonathan will be here to go over a sort of final set of design ideas, because on April 3rd is the public workshop. We want to show at the workshop only what you have already seen and that you've had input into. So that's why we think the 26th meeting we would show you a final draft, if you will. And then we can still touch that up and make any changes before the workshop. So, but Jonathan and I got going over dinner tonight on the next steps beyond that, and they're on the timeline here. So I just wanted to suggest that if we could set a date for the April after the workshop, we need to debrief with you. And we've always been meeting, this is a question, and I know that Mark has always said you wanted to meet on the last Wednesday of the month. And so that would be April 30th. So we're wondering about April 30th after the workshop, there's obviously going to be a lot of questions, comments. We think we ought to digest those, go through them with you at a meeting on April 30th. If that's okay as a date.
That's our regular meeting, so that should
Yeah,
work. Yep.
great. Good. And then we have the sort of, on the timeline, there's a final presentation. And if that were at the end of May, it would be May 28th. So I think that's the last Wednesday of May. I do have a question on that, whether you want to invite or we should have a larger outreach to the public to tell them about that presentation. So maybe it's here, or maybe it's,
Maybe
not
at
sure.
the senior center.
Senior Center, yeah.
Where are you planning to do the April 3rd event? Maybe a
Senior
larger
center.
space.
Senior
Okay, so
center.
that might make sense to
Might make
mirror
sense,
that.
yeah. Okay, great. All right.
So I'll check room availability over there for the 28th.
For the 28th,
And let you
right.
know for May.
Okay. Great, because that kind of, we're due to be finished before the summer, and I think we're on schedule, and that will give us the key missing dates here then. So I've got, as well as the committee meeting in March, public workshop April 3rd, that's here. Then, April 30th, we would meet with you and debrief from the workshop and have a draft almost for you. And then May 28th, that would be the presentation to you all and to the public. And obviously, after that presentation, if there's a touch-up to the report, we would do it, give you a final report in June. So that actually, we're on schedule so far. So that's sort of the big picture here. And then, oh, sorry, yeah.
And that all makes sense, but I'm just mildly nervous about no meeting between the end of April and the final presentation in May. Because at the end of April, so public workshop.
Right.
Figure all that out, the end of April, and then we're going to jump to a final report. It
No,
feels like there needs to be.
No.
30th.
We're gonna, I'm sorry. Is it
John.
John? That's what I
Yeah.
thought. April 3rd is the public
Yeah.
workshop. After the workshop, April 30th,
Yeah,
we want to meet with you. We want to debrief from the workshop, and we want to have a working draft on April 30th
okay.
so that you see it.
It's-
Then, based on your comments to us, April 30th, we would finish that draft for you before May 28th, so you see everything. That's our thinking.
I think we need to reserve the opportunity to perhaps to have something in between those two, because if it
Okay,
is
yeah,
as in-depth as it is potentially could be,
it could be, yeah.
it may warrant,
Yeah.
either it's going to be a really long meeting,
Or,
two manageable meetings.
no, we'd be okay on that. If we could do that one by Zoom, it would help us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a mid-month April.
mid-
Zoom.
Mid-month April by
something.
Zoom,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
If needed, just to.
Yeah, if
touch up
needed,
If there's
yeah.
things,
Okay.
going on.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay. All right, great. Yeah, no, because that is very important to us that we be on, this needs to be your plan and plan you're totally comfortable with so that it gets, the ability to implement it is enhanced. And so that's fine. Okay, great. Well, the other thing, I just wanted to hand these out to everybody. This is, you're going to see these in this slide presentation, but I felt the slide screen, it might be a little bit,
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
so, oh, excuse me, sorry. Yeah, and Abby, for other, if you need them, there's other, so like for Mark, we've got hard copies, so when you return, we'll get all these hard copies, so yeah, so the timeline there.
I have hard copies with me, so thank you. though.
Oh, okay. All right, great. So, let me just cover the zoning a little bit. Our idea on this, well, first, on the left-hand side of this, on the zoning, is just the big picture of what exists now, our understanding of it.
Can we go 2 slides forward, please?
Yeah. Oh, hold on that just for a minute.
Okay, sorry.
Just to, in yellow there, is just an update on the property owner stakeholder outreach. So we have, in yellow, are all the owners of the land, that's the land they own. So we are trying to, that one property owner, where's the Starbucks shopping center, he's not, we called, we tried to reach him.
I'll reach out to them.
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't think we actually need to talk to Frontier. They're just going to be, as you know, Abby knows, we've been trying to reach Frontier and also the new owners of the gas station. So, and we haven't really talked to the post office, but it's kind of, we assume they're going to stay. So, but we have talked to all the other owners. And you'll see on our plan, by the way, the owner of all of the land there in yellow, right out here, just to the east of us in Town Hall, I have forgotten his name, tell you the truth, I'm terrible on names, but were you on that call? That was a unique call.
No.
And,
Timothy.
Tim, yes, yeah, very pleasant call, but sort of, it's just was a response that doesn't have any current plans at all. So he had nothing really to share with us. I'm familiar with the background of it a little bit, but we're going to show on the plan some, and you'll see Jonathan's ideas on access to that property and in the zoning, the mixed-use capabilities, the developing it, but he had no particular, ideas, motivation, or ideas to offer. So all the other owners seem to be, they seem to be on board with this study. Not that he wasn't on board with this, but he just didn't have any, he didn't offer any kind of input to it, so. So that's the one thing. So we can go to the next slide, though. So so there's the, you can see on the left and on your hard copy, it's the same. The existing zoning, and now our idea on the proposed zoning is that we've created, if you will, we're suggesting that we create a Granby Center zone. And the Granby Center Zone A in the dark red, which is really the heart of the study area. I think, basically between the green and then the grocery store, and between Route 20 and Hartford Avenue. And that being considered the Granby Center A zone. We see a little bit of a difference in there where you got Bank Street, Route 20, and you got 202 and Route 10, and then you have Hartford Avenue. It's really a compact area, and we think there's a different approach that could be done in that dark red area of, you'll see when Jonathan gets to design ideas on sidewalks, connections, walkability. But we're not seeing on the other side of that, the pink. We see the pink as Granby Center also, but Granby Center B. It's a little bit different, where lot sizes might be a little different. It's not going to be quite as walkable. It won't, you don't have the sense there that you're in an actual, center of town. Even though it is the center, we think there's a difference between what we're calling Granby Center A and Granby Center B. I mean, this could all become different names. By the way, where we started with this is, can we just do one zone for the whole center? But as we got into the details and discussing this with Jonathan and design details, we thought it might be better to have Granby Center and then two parts of the zone, an A in the center and a B. You'll see as we get into the zoning, a lot of the uses are the same, but area and bulk regulations are a little bit different. So I'll just bring you through this because this is a big kind of decision as to whether we go this way, but we thought it would be good to do that. There's one other item I wanted to point out to you. Well, it'll go to the next slide. And if you go to the next sheet here, you'll see that there's one lot, and I want to highlight this because it could be, and I think this is why we called you earlier, Abby, on this. The lot in yellow at Hartford Avenue and where Route 10 is, where CE, it's located, see the CE there, that one house, it did seem to us that was worth putting in a Granby Center zone category. Again, we're trying to stay to your existing zoning lines as much as possible, but we thought that one house made sense to be, it's right on the corner. I realize there's a small accessory building that's right close to the road, but it's basically the corner house. Seemed to us that it makes sense in the Granby Center zone. But that's the idea of, we didn't make other, we did add on a little bit down here, so that we picked up, we made sure that's consistent with the existing zoning. So other than that, I think we're not changing the map very much, but we are relabeling Granby Center into an A and B zone. So it takes a little thinking to go through this. That's why we thought, hey, we have this meeting, we go through preliminary zoning ideas with you, and then the next meeting, sort of solidify those as much as possible for discussion. But that's the overall idea. And we might come back to this too. But the third,
Hey,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just to make sure I understand the conversation about the one lot. Is that where the print shop is?
Yes.
The lot next to
Okay.
it. The lot next.
The lot next to it. Right.
Mark, it's two properties. The print shop is one, it's a sliver, and then the house with the detached garage is a second
Right.
property. And it's the house with the detached garage.
And you know what? If you go to the next slide and you turn to the next page, we got a blow up of it, Mark. You'll see there we show it. We say, site now included in the Granby Center B zone, the house. The print shop,
Okay, so that's the property the planning commission took some recent action on.
Yes.
The sliver.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
And to look at both properties. Both properties were looked at.
Change was made for one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's the
yeah.
same owner, correct? And then the change was made for the print shop,
for the print shop.
which will now be a coffee shop, and then not for the house.
Right. Now, we realize, I'll jump ahead a little bit, we've got some language later, which, we realize that putting this house into a Granby Center zone raises the question, well, now, it can be used for more uses.
That was the
So-
proposal, like, office with
Yeah.
accessory apartments of mixed use.
So we're suggesting some text that if in return for that, we allow them to use more uses, but that there be some proviso, if you are you're in an historic district and you're contributing to, the house contributes, it's significant, that the house remain, that the historic structure itself remain, although it can be used for non-residential purposes. So that's our compromise of trying to preserve Route 10 and those historic houses, but also this one is so close to the center to allowing other uses in it. That was the thought process. And then you can see here, the other ones are, there's now actually, let me point it out, there's a, can you point out, Jonathan? No, they can't.
I'm not
We don't have-
controlling
we don't-
this,
we're not
yeah.
Controlling it. There's a, actually, Jonathan will get into this later, just south of the major grocery store here. It's a area right there which we're suggesting be rezoned into a Granby Center A zone. And we actually have a suggestion for that parcel that's outlined. And right now, there's nothing there. And it's a vacant piece of land. We've got an idea for some residential development there. That's another one, and then this area here also be rezoned to Granby Center B area. So we've tried to basically, the pink, what we're taking is a section of the CC zone, and that's on the major roads in the pink, and just converting that to Granby Center B. So, and I'll get into uses in those zones. So that's but I just wanted to highlight we tried to minimize any real major map changes, but there are those couple of changes.
Some steps.
Great.
Yeah,
Oh,
nice.
thank you. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It doesn't work.
Oh, it does.
No, the pointer should.
The point,
Oh, I guess it does.
because it's the TV.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Stupid team.
I know.
It does work.
Because I have one of those.
Works on the
copies as well.
rest of the-
I was like, I'm not bringing it out because
You're gonna have to use your
projection of the work.
Yeah, you're right.
Good try, though.
You're gonna have to put your steps in.
Great consideration, appreciate it.
So- And you go to the next slide, I think it might pick up, okay, that's gonna go then to area and bulk. I just wanted to mention on your hard copy, there's one thing on the fourth page, and I covered this. The zoning idea we had on, if you're in the historic overlay, that's the blue on the final map here. We've overlaid the whole thing with a blue, your historic district along Route 110. It's the final page of this little handout here. So that house we've been just discussing is in the historic district. So that's why we wanted to say that, hey, if you have a house in the historic district, yes, in the Granby Center Zone, you're going to get more uses allowed, but that they may utilize the allowable uses, provided that the structure's preserved. So that's what we wanted, that's the attempt we're trying to make sure that happens within the historic district
Is it
So,
overlay? It's not district. No.
right, overlay.
overlay,
Just
right?
preserving the exterior of the building.
Correct.
Yep.
Yep.
So how exactly would that work though? So someone comes in with a proposal, they do not want to keep the historic structure. Would special permit uses be allowed or what?
Okay, so say
How
on
does
that particular house, someone came in and said, we don't want to preserve the, we're saying that in order to get the uses that we would allow in the center zone, other than what they're able to do now, they won't be able to do those, take advantage of those unless they preserve the historic structure. They can gut the interior of it, but because my understanding from meeting with the historic district is it's the exterior that's preserved. You have no interior designations, they told me. So,
Which is common.
yeah,
Have it just be. the
yeah, it is
exterior.
common, but I wanted to make sure of it because, so Abby, you still have a
So,
question?
yeah, I'm
not
sorry,
sure
I
I'm
still
answering.
don't follow that.
Yeah, okay.
So we have proposed uses allowed by right and then
Right.
special permit uses.
Yes.
So you have a structure that's in the historic overlay zone. The person does not want to keep the structure. Where would we be looking to see what's allowed there?
To the zone, to the zoning area and bulk schedule or use schedule.
But they,
I was gonna say, so I think I'm tracking where Abby's going.
Tracking where Abby's going.
If somebody doesn't, they're like, nothing prevents them from going, all right, I'm gonna take out a demolition permit, I'm gonna flatten it, and then I'm gonna build whatever is then allowed within the zone.
okay.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah, so they can
I
do whatever
see.
they want.
I see. And nothing actually prevents that.
That's
correct.
Yeah.
Thank you for interpreting.
Great, thanks. Okay, I wasn't there yet.
It's
Yeah.
tracking, like, okay,
Okay,
Yeah.
and that is the situation
which is,
now.
I mean,
It
yeah, we
is,
have,
they
there's
could've taken it
arrows, you know,
down.
yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
that's right. So, but they could do it, they can do it now. They could just demolish the
Correct.
buildings.
That's right.
And then they could come in. I'll have to think about that. That's someone who demolishes, say, and then 2 years later, they come in.
10 minutes
Two
later.
minutes later, 10 minutes later, they come in, because our goal was to try to not allow that.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. But-
Does this maybe hark back or reference back to the discussion you were talking about before, why that only the sliver with the print shop was allowed to change designation? It was the effort there really to try and, preserve the historic house there and not allow for a broader range of uses?
So certainly preserving the house
Yeah.
was essential and a main component of the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
However, the property owner did state that even with the zone change, that was his intention, to keep the house.
Right.
But again, there's nothing in the regulations that requires that. Certainly a property owner
Okay.
is able to demolish. We do not have a demolition delay ordinance.
So while he would not have, someone could.
Someone could, yeah, unless we suggest that in this zone and in the historic district, we put a demolition delay clause in. That's not going to prevent them, though.
Correct. It just gives
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah,
For an
gives time.
interested party to.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back for a second. And you mentioned something you have to think about this. Okay, so
Yeah.
my question is, what is there to think about within the center zone that encompasses that part of the overlay zone, the historic overlay zone, is part of that center district? What are we stumbling on here to think about?
I agree with you, Marty. I don't know what we're stumbling on.
Because you have to look at a couple things. One, you look at the historic area. You have to also look at physically what is in that historic overlay area.
Right.
Okay? So when you look at that in the center area, and I'm going to call that the reddish and the pink part.
Yes.
And to the demolition point, what is there to talk about and to think about preserving? We want to be realistic about it.
We do.
Okay?
It's going to be part of the commercial side of it.
Yeah.
In the red and the pink specifically?
Right, in the red and the pink. So with respect to what to think about for what these properties can be used for, we're looking at both sides of the coin, permitted and special permit,
That's right.
correct?
Yes.
So it's everything, so that there's nothing really to bifurcate here or to, we need to look at all the uses that we have written down on paper for those areas.
Well,
But
let's,
I do like the idea about the demolition delay holistically, because it would at least give a bite of the apple, go like, hey, think about what, to maybe ameliorate somebody's frustration with the process or something like that, to get them to yes in a different way. Because I would say at least, perhaps not in the red, but in the pink, there are some places that I think we would twitch if somebody came in and said, we're just gonna tear it down.
Right. So we should talk about then what is the mechanics of that?
Mechanistically, how that.
Where does that lay, or where does that lie within our regulations or within what is being described as the overlay zone, which is not necessarily a regulation?
where we've
And the
seen it,
enforceability thereof.
Right.
yeah, where we've seen it applied in other places primarily is in such an historic district. In other words, if you're within the historic district, you could have the demolition delay apply to anything in the historic district. That's how we've seen it used in the past. Because, I asked them, were they only on the Federal Register? And they are basically, they went through the SHPO at the state level, but they're a Federal Register district, as I understand it. There is no local commission. So, but what we've seen is just within an historic district, you can control that in the zoning. If you want to put a demolition delay provision into the historic, of anything in the historic district, you could do that. I've seen other communities do that a bit. It doesn't raise the taking issue because it's a delay. It only delays and make them think about it. I hadn't meant to necessarily get into that, but we're only, by the way, maybe this is much ado about not too much, this one house, but what we didn't want to do was give them a greater incentive to tear it down. We wanted to write something, if we could, in the zoning that, and I realize what you're saying now, that wouldn't necessarily, they could get around that. Because if they tore the whole thing down and then 10 minutes later came in, they'd have a flat site and they could do what they wanted. So the demolition delay might be a way to at least have them think about it. What I have seen done in a couple of other communities is before you could get the demolition, on the demolition delay, I've seen the community say you can't rebuild until you show us the conceptual site plan. That's going a little far though, but I've
That's
seen that.
design guidelines there too, which
Yeah.
you guys have brought up, pointing
Yeah.
back to that.
Yeah. All we're trying to do here is allow, actually, for that house, we're trying to allow all the uses that we would allow in Granby Center, but the provision being that they preserve the house. They might make an addition, but they preserve the house. That was the intent. We might have to find out, I'm not sure the best way to accomplish it, yeah. So maybe we come back to it after,
I think we come back.
come back to it, yeah.
I have
We
it
don't-
written down
Discussion on
for
that.
Yeah.
next time.
Yeah, so, all right, then maybe we can go, okay, this, I kind of thought that this might be, this slide might be a little hard to read in the red line, so I've got some hard copies for you here. If I can just hand those out to you. Area in bulk schedule. John has very Bill.
Thank you.
Oh, you got it, okay, great. So in the red now, or the Granby Center area, in red are some of the changes we're suggesting. We kind of, actually, we talked about this at the very first meeting. Someone asked us, well, what's your first impression? One of our first impressions was the lot sizes are fairly large for the center. And here, the minimum front yard right now is 25 feet, as we understand it. We're suggesting just in the center, not on state roads, but in the center where you have Bank Street, there's other sort of driveways in there, that it be reduced to 15 feet. It seems to us that allows buildings to be a little bit closer. You still have room for a sidewalk, but you wouldn't have parking in the front of that building. There's not enough room.
Frank, can I ask?
Yes.
So, and I see it too for the front yard. Why the distinction between the state and the local roads for that?
We think the state road, the traffic is it's fairly intense in terms of traffic volumes and speeds. And also Jonathan's going to have some pictures at the end. Just going down your state roads here in Granby, but also I find this in other places in Connecticut, Durham, there's been a New England sense of trying to set back more on your arterial road, your state roads. And that's why we thought we should keep the minimum front yard of 25 feet on state roads. It kind of is, when Jonathan's got some slides later, we'll show you. We think you have that now. In fact, you have more than 25 feet.
I was going to say, did you look at that in the area to get an average or an idea of?
Yeah, we've got
where
some
they-
slides
okay.
on it. By the way, I'm not saying you couldn't, well, I wanted to avoid increasing it because, then you'd have lots of people at the public hearing if you did that. But I'm not saying you shouldn't. And when you drive down, or when I drive down, Route 10, you got nice setbacks. It's a very kind of Connecticut feel. I mean, you get that in the historic district in Durham, where Route 79, State Road, goes right through. Everybody's set back just a little bit. We didn't want to suggest increasing it because people would tend to, if you got a commercial developer coming in, you'd try to put parking in the front. So we didn't want to increase that. But we thought that the 25 feet is more appropriate to State Road. So all we're doing,
Would it make sense in any way to bifurcate that? Because if you think about it, and I agree wholeheartedly for Salmon Brook Street, it's absolutely, the visual is such, but that same visual doesn't exist on Hartford Avenue, which is a state road. It sort of exists on Route 20, but certainly not to the extent of Route 10. So I think maybe there's an opportunity there to, and again, the more you carve things out, the more difficult it gets. But I'm not sure whether all state roads are created equal.
yeah, no,
Just
that might
for
be
what
a
it's worth.
point. Our thought process here is that simply in the center, in the center itself. We're going to try to create some more sidewalk connections and better road system or driveway system in the center. All we're trying to do there is to decrease the front yard requirement from 25 to 15 to make it easier to develop, easier to build within the center. So that was the thought, and to keep your current regulation of 25 feet on those state roads. But it's for your thought process. That's why we just wanted to.
If you look at like some of the buildings that are along East Granby Road, Route 20, right? They range from about 40, 42 feet down to 32 feet, I think is kind of the closest. Nobody's dropping back down to that 25 foot. So even that 25 foot, we could maybe go back in time and say, what was the intention of that? Like when I think of this, and I'll show those slides that Frank's talking about, like when you're coming down into Granby Center, you do have this very beautiful New England setback, right? With the trees, the lawns and things. And then when you come into Granby Center, you kind of feel a little bit different, but not too much. So we were thinking what you have currently protects that, and even your 25 is less than what you have. But then again, if you were to say 15 feet at that point, that might be very close, was our thinking. However, there are different ways of thinking about it. Like I could think about coming down into Granby Center with this beautiful New England frontage, and then when you sort of come on East Granby Road, Route 20, coming down that sort of down the hill there, and then you hit Geisler's, maybe that's a bank street, maybe that's when things could close a little bit more. The problem that I think we had this discussion, and Frank, I think is right in saying that, what does that do in sort of, is that a good pedestrian environment? Is it good to be that close to that much traffic? And we thought not. And so it's up for discussion.
And we know that that's from our public input, one of the top priorities
Yeah.
is making it pedestrian
Pedestrian
friendly.
And I
And the
think,
point about, like, you don't want to leave room for more parking spots.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah,
there.
we don't.
but you know, even on the site that was designated, they had a very loose application in for residential on the north side of East Granby Road, right? We don't know the story of this, but they kept that house that was in the front. It's a nice house. It's not a great house, to be honest. It didn't look like it's really contributing to the historic nature. They kept it, and we wondered why they kept it. And it may have been because it is quite close to the street, and if they took that out, would they get the utilization of that part of the site anyway? I'm not sure what was going on, but even that house, if you look at it, and we said, wow, it's pretty close. That's 40 feet back from the roadway.
Yeah. By the way, the very next, we're only on the top line there, but the next line, we have introduced something new here, and that's the maximum front yard setback. You don't have a maximum. And in Granby Center, we thought that the minimum setback would be 15 feet, and the maximum, that's line 2, would be 20 feet. The reason we're doing that, we wanted to set a maximum, it's, by the way, the architects would call it a build-to line. It's a build-to line that varies from 15 to 20. And we thought, I don't want to explain that at a public hearing, so I thought it's easier to do a minimum front yard, 15 feet, and a maximum of 20. Why did we choose 20? Because you can't get parking in the front. You gotta have, you know, you're parking in the state, you're parking on the curb. So we wanted to have a maximum front yard setback in the center of 20 feet, and then 30 feet on state roads. So that was the thinking. The third line, we're not making any changes here except one. We want to allow, and Jonathan will get into this, one site south of Geisler's, where you could build townhouses. We don't see a townhouse is really to us a single family attached unit. So you're sharing a common wall. So as a result, you don't have a side yard requirement, or if you do, it's 0. they're sometimes called zero lot lines. But to allow townhouses, you have townhouses. So it's, we wanted to not require a side yard for the townhouses.
So that's conflating a little bit a real estate condition, i.e. Townhouse versus the building. So I struggle with the zero side, because zero side yard creates code challenges because you can't have windows and all these other things on the zero side. So I think for the space and looking at what you proposed for that, I think if that was designed as each one of those is an individual dwelling unit, kind of like an old school row house, I could see where you could make the interpretation that the middle units have no side yard.
Correct. Correct. The building mass, let's say there's 4 townhouses.
Yeah.
We'll still have to write it so that on the last townhouse, there's still a side yard requirement. And also what we'll probably want to write is you can't have more than, we usually pick 6 townhomes in a row before you have to have a break, because you want to be able to get them back in them. But we can write those. But what we wanted to get at is, and Jonathan will show you, we'll get to this. You know what, maybe come back to this one after we've done a design for that site, and we'll show you how that works. But in order to do it, we do have to allow townhouses. So a townhouse, again, a single-family attached structure. So if it's attached on both sides, you have no side yard, except at the end of that massive building. That's where you'd have the side yard.
So I guess my question is, how do the ones that exist today were constructed?
This issue.
So.
Yeah, I'm trying, it seems like we're making a problem where
Because-
there isn't one.
Oh, maybe there isn't, maybe you
So-
solved it.
Yeah, the attached units today, it's one property. So there are no lot lines. So the folks don't own their land.
Oh, you prevent, gee.
No, townhouses are allowed.
Yeah, but you want to allow, you definitely want to allow ownership to a townhouse.
Right, so so currently at least, most of the ones in town, you don't own the land. I'm trying to
So
think
they're
of.
kind of a condo setup.
Yes.
That's a
yes.
that's a condominium
Yes.
setup
Not-
rather than a fee simple. So you're
Correct.
prohibiting a fee simple then, which I would say we would never do that in writing zoning. You're not, you're not supposed to in zoning prohibit a form of ownership. So, and in fact, I think most towns want to encourage townhomes to be a fee simple ownership. Then you're taking, if it's an owner that's.
And this is back to John's
Yeah,
point
that's
about, right, you're bringing in these sort of real estate realities in some ways, market realities, and bringing those into zoning, but I think what Frank's saying is that that's a very viable type of housing product
Oh, yeah.
that you don't currently have. And so, again,
Maybe,
zoning.
by the way, now that I know that though, I mean, if you wanted to stay with the way you have it, that's your policy call. I mean, our sense is it's better to allow both a true condominium in which you only own the interior, you own the interior of your building, and then you have a condominium association which maintains all the rest. However, most of the codes we've written anyway, we also allow what's called just a fee ownership of the townhouse itself. You own the lot that it's on, you own the townhouse.
So basically you're creating a micro lot.
Yes, that's what a townhouse ownership is. And it's done all over the country. It's done here in Connecticut, a lot. Greenwich does it, communities.
And then you're in
working.
charge of the maintenance for
You're
your
in charge.
land.
You're in charge. But you're giving the developer, you're giving the applicant a choice. He can do the true condominium, and then you have, you have an association
Yeah.
that's maintaining the property. And a lot of people like that.
I was gonna say, given next thing, so if we're gonna create micro lots, then like, how does that end up working for everything from exterior maintenance to snow to
Yeah.
lawn maintenance?
Yeah, right. By the way, I didn't mean to By the way, your overall policy you've set, so we don't have to, you're right, we don't have to do this if,
I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
how that arrangement
That's
works.
usually handled with a homeowners association. And in those situations, for example, this lot that we're showing, there could be a requirement that there is a association that takes care of the
and
maintenance.
you still own your own lot.
Right.
You still own your own lot, but there's a homeowners association. Yeah.
And when somebody comes by, you know, before a board or anything like that, it's really, it is a fee simple transaction. It's another real estate product.
Let's keep moving
Yeah, let's keep
forward
moving
on
on.
I
this.
think Mark had a question.
Mark,
I think Mark-
Sorry, Mark.
I'm just gonna throw it out there, but we can move on this and we can discuss it. So I get the townhome concept. I'm open-minded to creating a way to do it. But we do have to think carefully about having lot lines running through buildings. So they don't need an answer. We can discuss it more when we get to that section of your presentation.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and this is not a major issue, we just want to make sure townhouses could be allowed. And so you allow them, and you allow them in a certain way as condominium associations.
and if you wanted to
That's
continue
fine.
to do that,
Continue to do that, that's
fine
fine.
as well.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be fine. So we don't bring to this, I just want to make sure they'd be allowed, otherwise it's hard to develop this parcel for residential. So, okay, and then, the minimum parking, we'll get to that, we've got a parking schedule we wanted to go over with you. And then the maximum height of the buildings, you currently allow 3 stories, 45 feet, that's what we understand. And we're wondering if we could keep that for an all residential building, but for a mixed-use building, keep it at 3.5 stories, 48 feet, so it'd be 3 feet more. It's really to a little bit encourage the mixed-use building, because on the ground floor, this is in the center now again. Ground floor, if we're gonna have a retail building, you wanna have a floor-to-ceiling height for that retail operation of 12 to 15 feet. So you need just a little bit, it would be good to have just a little bit more height. We're not increasing this to 4 stories or anything like, but it would be 3.5, 48 feet. That's where that's coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then we get down to maximum lot coverage and minimum lot area. Now, we mentioned this before, so we're picking up on our idea and saying, if you have a minimum lot area, we're suggesting perhaps 15,000 square feet. We're not wedded to this, your current minimum lot area is 20,000 square feet, so we're reducing that only in the center to 15,000. And if we reduce it and we want to encourage building, we need a slightly larger maximum lot coverage. We suggested 40%. That's where that thinking is coming from. We're thinking of trying to get somewhat, to encourage some smaller buildings that could accommodate mom and pop stores. We're trying to respond to our market study a little bit and get a smaller lot size. No, not everybody's going to be able to take advantage of this, to tell you the truth. The change is fairly small, but it gives a little bit more flexibility. That's what it does for the property owner. And then also, we've reduced here in Granby Center A only, we just reduced the minimum lot frontage from 100 feet to 75 feet. That's at 75 feet, so we feel very comfortable. We debated reducing it more, but we didn't want to get into, thought we'd be sort of modest in the change. But those are the area and bulk kind of changes. Now, the other big one is Granby Center B, so outside at the center, the other side of the state road, you have the minimum lot area you have for multifamily is 5 acres. And it's we're wondering if that can be reduced.
Make a suggestion.
We sort of made the suggestion here of 1.5 acres. We debated between 1.5 or 2 acres. But you can do a fairly nice, small, multifamily, building on 1.5 acres or 2 acres. So that's what we're suggesting here on that outer perimeter. And then on the parking next page, by the way, I'm sorry to be so, get into such detail, but that's what zoning is. So, on parking, you currently, single family, yes, 2 spaces per unit. Your current regulation for multifamily is, as we understand it here, 1.5.
Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Sorry. Is that the- One more. There we go. Thank you, sorry.
We find that what's worked for us, by the way, we're basically relying on something called ITE standards. They're sort of national standards, and we get ITE data. And that you could do this to require 1 space per unit. This is only in Granby Center. Because we think you're going to get smaller units, probably rental. That you could do 1 space per unit and then 1 space per bedroom. A quarter space per bedroom. So if you had a 1-bedroom, you'd be required to have 1.25 spaces. If you had a 2-bedroom, it'd be 1.5 spaces. If you had a 3-bedroom, then you'd be up to the 1.75. If you had anything bigger than that, it's 2 spaces, same as a single-family house. We found that those have generally worked in where you expect not huge, units, but, a mix of studios 1s and 2s. We don't see the center as being an area that would normally have a lot of 3s and 4s, but we're requiring, it's just by bedroom size. So it's 1 unit per, 1 space, 1 parking space per unit, plus a quarter space per bedroom. It's kind of a simple regulation, easy for everybody to understand, and it is a little bit less, provides a little bit less demand on parking than you currently have. So that's what we did there. By the way, we just had questions for you. This is not as relevant to us in the center, but you can see down your commercial office space requirement is 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, sorry. 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. That's a high ratio.
So I was going to ask, you've noted, just for Granby Center A and B, is this standard, would you recommend this across all zones, I guess is my point. Is there any reason why it would be different in the center, at least for these parking regulations versus other areas of town?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to,
It's been a while since,
yeah.
I don't even know when the parking
I
was
wanted
looked
to, the reason we started this way is we're thinking that if we hope you do, if you create and I hate to say I think this way, but I just, having been through some brutal public hearings that, have lasted a long time, and to get something done, actually, I would maybe recommend some lower standards town-wide, but I want to stay away from it because then you got the whole town looking at them. However, if we look at ITE standards, commercial office is never as high as 5. It's either 3 or 4. That's what we normally see.
It's very true, yeah.
So we don't see 5. The only place we see 5 is that was the old standard for shopping centers. And the old standard for medical offices was always 6. But we don't see 5 normally. So we've said in the center where we might have shared, we'd like to have all the parking unreserved and shared between uses, that 3 is okay. Townwide, it might not be. Might be 4. I'd recommend though townwide 5 is high. We have rarely seen that. Then now medical office in the center, the normal standard for medical office has traditionally been 6. But we thought in the center, and you don't have to do this, but we thought that 4 might make some sense in the center, where we have shared parking. And the key to this is no parking can be reserved for anybody. It's just totally, you go one parking lot to the other, you park wherever you want, nothing's reserved. And then for retail stores, again, you've got 6. We just don't see it that high in most codes. We think that 3.5 spaces per unit is okay for retail stores. Now, we're thinking again in the center. And by the way, these are minimums, so if somebody in another place in town wants more parking, I wouldn't think P&Z would have any objections to it. But we're trying to get these a little bit lower. Now, your shopping center, we weren't going to prohibit a shopping center, but you got one. And we think the 5.5, again, is high. We rarely see that anymore today. The normal one is 5, and you can see we've reduced it here to 3. Every time, well, I have to admit though, we had dinner at the Italian restaurant, I forgot the name.
La Figata.
La Figata. And this is the time where I did see quite a few cars. I don't know what's going on there tonight, if anything, but I saw,
Wednesday.
it's Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Okay. But we've never seen it, we've never seen it full.
People get
We've never seen it full, so we were wondering in the district if we could reduce, in the Granby Center District, could reduce the parking requirement. Now, again, these are judgment calls a little bit. What's not as much a judgment call, though, is we've got ITE, like office, your office standard is, ITE doesn't recommend this, it's high. So the one I would debate is, that I don't want to, well, I'm just making life easier for, I don't know, guessers may have 5.5 spaces per 1,000. This just makes it easier
So
to do
one
some
one
things there.
thing I think should be noted, unless
Yeah.
I'm missing it.
Yes,
And you mentioned reserved parking. So really, the only reserved parking should be for disabled.
oh, yes, by the way, federal law,
Yeah, that's
So-
mandatory.
you must do that.
Correct. So that we should note that
Okay.
too also, and wherever it would fit in.
Yeah.
It is part of the overall parking equation.
So
Even-
I guess the question is, does that mean like those spots don't count towards this calculation? Or they do? And I'm asking because I don't know.
Well, when it comes to
Oh, sorry.
the total creation of the number of spaces that you need, you have to add those in.
However you do it now is the way I would stay with.
Right.
In other words, however you do it now, that's a federal law. So,
Accessible parking.
yeah, handicap parking, you have to have, and you got to follow the federal calculations on that. So we thought, we didn't break it out here, but we can put a footnote in here and say, you got to follow the federal regulations on handicap parking, which you have to do anyway, so. yeah, that's fine. Anyway, I got through a little bit area and bulk, what I call area and bulk standards. And I think the use standards are much easier because we didn't get into, let me hand these out because they'll be easier to read. But if you go to the next slide,
Are we going to do shared parking or are we going to?
Oh, sorry.
Skip over.
did I?
It's at the bottom of the slide.
Oh, yes, the footnote is important. We wanted to give the P and Z discretion to reduce the at only the P and Z's discretion if they wanted to reduce the parking if it truly is shared parking between a commercial use and a residential use on the same site, because they peak at different times usually. To give you the discretion to reduce the standard by, we picked, I believe here, 30%. If you want that to be, anything up to that would be the discretion of the P&Z. So we're giving you we'll be giving the P&Z a lot of discretion here. What we usually find is we like you to exercise that discretion on the basis of an applicant's parking study, showing it works, that type of thing, but it gives P&Z discretion.
Have you seen anybody do that and not limit it to on the same lot?
So,
To prevent the paving of America, like a contiguous, you've got a contiguous lot. It's two separate pieces of property, but it's interconnected parking to be able to have the ability.
yes, so John, under our current regulations, there is a provision that allows, parking spaces within a radius of 500 feet of any part of the property to count.
I like that. Because that was the only thing that popped out of me is like single lot. It's like, all right, that seems kind of limiting.
Yeah,
This should follow your general regulation. The more we can follow what you have is what we like to do within 500.
yeah, and we do currently have a provision that allows a 25% reduction for shared parking.
Oh.
So
Oh, you know
30%
what?
isn't too far off.
Why don't we keep it at 25 then? Oh, we'll keep it.
Would you
That way-
say it was 500 feet?
500 feet, yep, and then a reduction of 25%.
Yeah,
Like it.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I would say just keep it because where we can, we'd like to, the fewer changes that we have to explain, the better off we are. So if that's in your code now, that's fine. Yeah, we were doing a search for your code and I missed that.
It's a little all over the place. I'm surprised it was missed.
I missed it, yeah. So, all right.
It's even more important too when you begin to shrink lot sizes and the coverage ratios. You're forced to look at parking. So,
Well, I think too, if you want to promote walkability, that does that in an organic manner. You can park here and then go.
Hey, May, can I ask a couple questions before we move on?
Yes.
Yep.
So I'm looking at the bulk chart that you guys prepared. And I have a question on the first column under COCE, which is the existing zoning. There's a dash under minimum lot area for multifamily uses. Does that mean that the current code doesn't allow multifamily uses in that zone?
No, so Mark, currently multifamily is allowed in that zone, so you would just need a lot that complies with the minimum acreage needed in that zone. So there's no special provision, like you don't need excess land to have multifamily.
Okay. And my second question on this chart is, so in the proposed Granby Center Zone B, we're talking about reducing the minimum lot area for multifamily uses to 1.5 acres. Have you guys plotted at all which existing lots that would affect, which existing lots are 1.5 acres?
We just we can plot it exactly. We took a sort of a visual of it, which is why we realized quickly that there's not a lot of opportunities at 5 acres. We were debating between 1.5 and 2. Mark, we can calculate that.
And I think
I'm just trying to
Yeah.
get an idea of how, because we're talking about the pink area, so I'm just trying to figure out how many current lots in the pink area, if we went to a 1.5 per acre standard, would be eligible for small multifamily. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a great calculation to do. I mean, I think one of the things that we did look at is that one site on the north side of East Granby that comes in right about that size. And we're not sure, again, of the history of that application or pre-application, really.
All we know is P and Z didn't like it. So,
We do know that. Okay, but however, we did see that as a viable potential residential infill. Maybe not at the configuration that was presented, but as an opportunity site to bring in residential into the center.
it's actually not a bad count. And I realize as I'm saying this, it's creating work, but with a lot of these, it's like, here's a case where with this change, you can do this, but before, without this change, you can't do that. Kind of like what would it enable, that currently is not enabled?
It's very true. I mean, at 5 acres.
I don't mean just for multifamily, I mean kind of like holistically for all those changes. Like now you can do this, and this here that otherwise wouldn't have been possible.
we'll take a look at it.
So let me just say this differently and then we can move on. So unless I'm judging it wrong, the pink area If we change it to 1.5, most of those lots, you could do multifamily on.
Wow.
Yeah,
Appears to me.
yes, most of them, and we can calculate the 1.5 acres, and if you feel that's too liberal, we can up it to 2 or 2.5 acres, but we find that some small multifamily units can fit on 1.5 kind of comfortably. Of course.
Especially with public infrastructure.
Yeah, by the way, this is assuming
We can go
there's
for it.
public
Ours is
infrastructure.
smaller than
That's
that.
another conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah, but Mark, you're right, there is a majority of the lots, I'm just looking at a map right now, and just visually, I can see, I know what 1.5 acres is looking like here. Yeah, there are a lot of lots that you could do that, but not the existing single-family smaller lots that are running towards the east side,
Right.
eastward on East Granby, and then even those that are running south, southeast along Hartford. It's really the lots that are in and around the center.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, because I do see the value of at least some. And I think I've heard constituents say that if we're going to do multifamily, they prefer it to be smaller scale. So I'm just trying to get a feel for what we're talking about.
okay, yeah.
But we can move on.
But by the way, that would create smaller scale,
That's right.
multifamily.
Right.
You would not have the current one out here that's a
Right.
little bit larger.
280.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, well, the use schedule, by the way, is, we haven't made, what we've done in, well, you can see first, the permitted uses are in green. Special permit use, sort of the yellow color. And, in the center A, Granby Center A, the dark red there, again, what we've done there is we've suggested that, right now, we've suggested that in the center, retail could be basically a permitted use as of right, rather than a special permit. So, that's where you want to have all the small, mom and pop stores. Now, I don't know if this has been, everybody's smiling, I don't know.
I mean,
Is that?
It's very logical.
Yeah, okay, good. I didn't know if there's a history here or something I didn't know about. The same on a mixed-use building. Now, we want to encourage mixed-use buildings, so we made that a permitted use. But we don't see anything wrong. In the center, we want to have, the mom and pop store, services on the ground floor, and logical use above would either be office, although the office market is limited, or residential, but they have a choice.
And that rated really high in public input, mixed use.
Okay, yeah. And then the same thing on multifamily. We wanted to allow multifamily in the center, and just allow it as a principal permitted use. We didn't see a problem, and there may have been in the past with banks and financial institutions, but this is the center, and we didn't see a problem with one. That's why we made it a permitted use. And then personal service shops, the same thing, we made that a permitted use. So what we've done is simply allow some uses, and then retail sales or alcoholic beverages, I didn't quite know, that might be a package store, I guess. But we would permit it in the center, we didn't see anything
There's
extra.
already 3.
Yeah, there's already 3, right?
Right.
All right.
1, 2, 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's version.
And
Might need some more.
Yeah.
by the way, this is a question for you on certain things that are just not filled in right now on your permitted uses. Government buildings, including firehouses, accessory uses customarily resident incidental to permitted uses. Why you don't, they're blank. We would normally allow those, as you know, permitted. without a special permit. I didn't know if there's, again, a history on that or not.
Think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, that like the accessory uses in the zoning regulations are pretty detailed. Ish.
Yes and no.
Yeah, so I don't know if we'd be comfortable with just a blanket, if it's a, because then you get into what's a customary, the argument of what's a customary incidental or permanent uses.
Right now, can I ask?
But you're right, it's blank.
Yeah, right now, if it's blank, what does that mean? Does it mean they're not submitted?
Great question. No idea.
Okay. Well, we would at least make the two of those, well, government buildings, you are exempt. Government buildings we'd allow. But accessory uses, you could make it a special permit then, if you, by the way, if those have been creating problems or.
To be honest, I would have to look at that in more
Look at
detail.
that,
I
yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if some of it is just an oversight, in all
Just
honesty.
okay, yeah, all right,
With
yeah.
some of these.
Okay, then I'm gonna just circle these, I'm just writing down, Abby will let us know. Okay. And then the only other one, which we thought at the very bottom, antique sales, we would think you'd want those.
So that one is a little bit different because that's specific to if it's associated with a single-family home.
Oh.
So it's like a home occupation, because
Oh,
otherwise it
okay.
would just be considered a retail
All
sale.
right, then you know what, we'll
So
just
there's,
cross that off.
yeah, that one's a
We
little.
just cross it off, yeah, okay, I didn't realize that. Okay, and that's the basic use chart for the center. Now, the pink area is a little bit, I don't think we made, in the pink area, so that would be Granby Center B, the other side of the state roads. We did not make, I'll just be sure, we didn't make any changes. We kept the uses all pretty much as you allow them now. So where we loosened up, we made some special permit uses, principal permitted uses, so that it would be just easier to get those applications in. So that's the change there. With that, sorry to take up,
Do you want to
go ahead.
talk about any of these two slides? Or have you covered
Nope, we
these?
covered it.
Okay.
Covered it. We can
So let's go forward a couple slides, maybe one more. All right, great. So I've got a lot of slides, but I'll try and move quickly. I know it's late.
Getting to
We
design.
talked about
Oh,
this.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Good stuff, though.
I'm sorry, as Jonathan goes along, if there's anything you can't read,
Yep.
here's the hard copy.
We'll just begin with this overview opportunities map. It's a collection of ideas, and you can see here that in yellow, we have the various sites that we identified as opportunity sites. Some more than others, so we will focus in a little bit on Bank Road, so we have some ideas about that. And you see that we have a potential residential infill opportunity down at the south, and then at the north, we have the old vacant bank building as a potential mixed-use development. We're back to this a site I can't seem to let go for some reason, this one on the north side of East Granby that had the pre-application. And then we've already spoken about the lighter yellow site, which is a collection of about 6 or 7 sites over there on the west side, and that those belong to Timothy, and we had that conversation. We see that as a very long-term opportunity, if then, sometime for the future. Some other things here that we're beginning to outline that we'll go into more detail is a proposed circulation, pedestrian circulation, and a vehicular connection through sort of the center of the main Granby block, and improving that circulation and making it more accessible. And we identify a few additional potential crosswalks, some bike parking, and if we look at a little further to the south there, in the event of a large-scale activity, if you needed some overflow parking, maybe a portion of the church parking or parking area, that lot might serve as a potential opportunity for that. But let me get into sort of a little bit of the details here on the next slide, please. So this is the beginning concept of a pedestrian circulation system. And you can see where we already have sidewalks and they run through the town green. They sort of disappear along East Granby Road and continue along the south and along Bank Street. Along Merchants Way, at some point, there was sidewalk put in, and it kind of leads you to the end of that site and then sort of disappears. Can we look to make some pedestrian pathways through that? And then work to allow traffic to continue down through Merchants Way and bring them around through the back of the shopping center and back out to Hartford. We were cognizant of this discussion of people trying to find cut-throughs based on the heavy traffic at various points in the day. We don't see this as serving that. It's not going to. It's not going to be any quicker, believe me. But it does allow for, again, not only circulation, but it fosters this idea that shared parking and accessibility to all of these different lots within the center is now open. It's, we're going to facilitate that physically as well. And so.
Jonathan, I'm just going to mention, as we go through these.
Yep.
Think about, because at the end, at the very end of this report, we've got to think about how this is achieved. And, whether we build in incentives in the zoning to get easements, how do we get these sidewalks? Do we get easements from property owners in return for some incentives in the zoning? Or do we set up a special services district? Or does the town take on some of these sidewalk construction type of things? And as we go through this, you might think about.
Dumb question, and maybe people smarter than I already know it. What's the per foot cost of building sidewalk?
In today's marketplace, I don't know, and I should get that. We can get that to you.
Could be useful, because
Yeah.
don't disagree, love
Yeah.
sidewalks. Greater possibility we have to get people to move.
Oh, we
get-
have that.
It's
More
awesome.
grants for sidewalks than a lot of other things. Doesn't take care of everything, but
By the way, there are a lot, there's been more money than I think. There's been a surplus of federal grants for sidewalks. And that may not exist much longer, but there has been. My hometown, I'll tell you, we've just building a sidewalk that I feel we don't need, actually, in Madison. But we've got the money, we've got the federal grant. And, but there have been federal grants for sidewalks. So there's ways to get that also in the grants.
Yeah, no, good point. We were discussing that on the way up, actually. So if we go to the next slide, we can begin to look at some ideas for expanding the town green. And when we first began this, we looked at the Frontier building as an opportunity. And we sort of are coming back, maybe that's a very, very long-term opportunity. Getting that and removing that infrastructure might be difficult. But we did notice a few things on the existing conditions here, is that the Frontier building is being accessed over the actual public land that is part of the green. And maybe that should come back into the fold and be part of the green proper. And we also looked at the amount of parking that is reaching south in front of the Frontier building, and was there ways to maybe rethink this? So we have a couple sketch ideas. If we go to the next slide, we can see a first proposal here, which would be to, if we begin with the Frontier building, could an easement or an access agreement be found that they could come through the Citgo site and back to where they already have current parking? That gives us this full, complete green now on the south side of that building. And then could we, pull back some of the roadway and parking that used to be the old, forget the name of that highway that ran through that was.
Park Place.
Park Place, thank you, Park Place. Can we pull some of that back and reconfigure the parking so Grassroots still continues to operate with as much parking as we can kind of squeeze in there? This configuration might be actually easier for people to sort of circulate in and out of. And again, rather than stretching south and getting close to the Wall Memorial with parking, maybe that really is set in an apron of green there. In this configuration, previously, in the existing configuration, there are 24 available parking spaces. Some of them, about half of them public and half of them on the Grassroots property. In this configuration, it comes down to about 18. The second proposal is, next slide, please, is pretty much another idea on providing access to the frontier.
You mind going back?
I'm sorry, one more back. There were two slides.
One more back.
They look the same. There we go.
Yeah.
That's the one. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was looking down here.
Yeah.
And this would, again, from this vehicular circulation pathway that we would propose that would bring people and connect to Merchants Way, bring them around past the sort of the backside, the rear side of Granby Village Shops. And then maybe there's an offshoot. Again, this would require an easement, and that would be a way for Frontier to be accessed vehicularly. But either way, this, sort of brings back into the fold this southern part of the green.
By the way, what we're trying to do a little bit without maybe saying so explicitly, for me, if you look at, I hate to make it because it's such a different thing, but Elizabeth Park in Hartford, West Hartford, they've got a restaurant in there, sort of like a Grassroots. And to me, the Frontier building, we're trying to make it a building, it's a nice building. When you look at it, I mean, it's a brick building. It's not bad architecture. It's a building in a park. We're trying to expand the park. We're trying to expand your green, as much as we can to the Citgo gas station. So that's what we're trying to do.
Will we ever, and I didn't spend any time on it, determine whether there was an actual easement for Frontier to cut across them?
I just added that to my list. I forgot from the last one.
I did too. Only
The report back.
I wondered.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not sure how that came about.
Whenever we've been there, there's
Nobody.
nobody, right? There's one car, or there's two, or there's a truck. There's nobody really. So we don't feel they need much parking. We're providing it in this scheme. We're just getting it in from another access point. So we want to give them access, but we also want it to be seen as a building in a park or a green. We're trying to increase the size of the green. So you can actually have bigger, well, I shouldn't say bigger events, but, events that have more room for people to come.
Next slide, please.
Question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the two green proposals, 1 and 2, from whom do we need access easement? Is it Citgo in both cases?
Yes.
Okay.
And in this configuration, Mark, proposal 2, we've taken a look at what the utilization of that back part of the site is. It's used for kind of storage, and to be honest, it's not very well maintained. There's a lot of waste back there. It is sort of underutilized, and it might be, this might actually be the easier configuration to pursue.
We wouldn't say on this one where it would affect, in fact, I'm not sure. Is this option from Citgo, or is it from Granby Village Shops? I'm not sure.
It's the Citgo property goes back.
It does go
all the
back,
way
yeah,
back.
I think the
Okay,
flush
so we
back.
need a rear, we need an easement then in the back, which,
Yeah, the Citgo goes almost like to a triangle point
Right.
at the top. Not quite, but
Not
it would be cutting the top of their
Yeah.
pyramid
yeah.
there, which might be
Which has no-
more preferable than coming
Yeah,
in their
that's
active
right.
driveway.
That's right, yeah.
And
actually make it easier for them getting deliveries and stuff and not clog up the front of the building when they
Yeah,
get
not clog up
deliveries.
the
So
front.
there may be a win for them.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
might be. Next slide, please. So we have a concept plan for Bank Street, and it really involves three areas. At the top are rethinking of the vacant bank property on the corner of Bank and East Granby Road. Then potential townhouse infill development down to the south, and then sort of something we're calling a green ribbon or a linear gathering space that sort of connects those. And broadly, the concept here is sort of two anchors: good quality buildings, buildings that contribute to public life, and then this idea of a linear gathering space where people can sort of hang out. It's not very wide. It adds some greenery to this frontage. It provides sidewalk and sort of improves that connectivity. Next slide. So I'll begin.
I want to just mention here, Jonathan, pretty quickly, that at our ownership, the owners meeting that we invited owners to, there was a representative from Geisler. So he does know about, not this specific design, but he knows, I checked with him about our concept of having a green space up there. And he did, and actually for bicycles also. He did not express any objections to it. So they do know about this concept. They haven't seen the drawing yet.
So next slide, please. And so if we begin with this green ribbon or the linear public space, the vision here is maybe something along the lines of these photos, where it can be a narrow space, it can provide places for seating and for some greenery, some street furniture. There can be places to sit. It can be done very traditionally, as in sort of that bench on this nice, granite block area right there. But it would have some interest. And at the southern portion of it would be this bike stop where we'll show some pictures of that. Next slide, please. And there might be opportunities to provide some shading devices along here. Really a place for people to hang out in Granby Center. And this is a section down below showing this. The overall width of this varies between, it's quite narrow, between 25 and 30 feet in that instance. And how much space does that occupy? It does occupy essentially that first row of parking that is on the edge of the Geisler parking lot. So it is occupying that. This idea was sparked by our initial sort of drawing of this. We put in the bike stop that Greg had said, yeah, that might be okay there. And then we sort of taken a little bit of liberty to expand this just as an idea for consideration. Next slide, please. From a sustainability standpoint, having this green space along the edge of this quite large parking lot could give an opportunity to include some low-impact development standards, areas for runoff and water to be collected and to return clean back into the water table. Next slide, please. And then this is sort of, what the bike stops look like on many bike paths where they have a little pump and a fix-it station. You can have some very traditional bike racks. You can do something that's a little bit artsy to, sort of spruce things up. Next slide, please. And then the idea that leading down to Merchants Way and ultimately leading down into this expanded pedestrian network that's running through the center, we could designate this intersection with something special. Some printed pavers to add something in there. We've sort of dubbed it here Crosswalk Square as sort of the center of Bank Street. And we could change material quite easily there. There are some pros and cons to this. It has some aesthetic improvements, and it does cost a little bit more than just regular tarmac, and there are some maintenance costs that go along with it. Next slide.
Can
Yes,
I guess, because it's one of the bubbles and one of the things that intrigued me with it is that as a traffic calming tool as well. And I guess my curiosity is what your experience has been with like that as a raised table.
well, next slide, it
Okay,
covers
don't
raised
wanna head
table, right?
Change
So that was, this is in Rye, right?
I can give you,
Very
I can
close.
give you a whole history of this. This is where I have my New York residence is, and I live about a half a mile from here. This is Rye, New York. It's a table that's been done to try to eliminate a major, they learn with these tables. This table has a very, very, very slight increase in it. And then that's the concrete there. You see the asphalt, then the concrete is a slight, very slight increase in height. And then you've got the Belgian block in there. So it's been very nicely done. You can do this. I think it'd be very appropriate. The only thing we wanted to point out is that, as Jonathan said, it does have obviously a little bit more cost, because as soon as you raise something, even an inch or two, and put in new material, you can raise the cost a little bit. And Rye learned a little something about it. This went in about 8 years ago, and they just came back this year, actually, earlier this year, and had to put in some new cobblestone, and because in a northern climate like this, you get either this shrink swell potential of ice, and so it's a little bit more maintenance, but as long as that's built in and you know that it's a trade-off.
But, John, one of our initial thoughts was, could this operate in dual purposes as a traffic calming? And, Frank will get mad at me, but, this is Rye that does cobblestone or Belgian block.
yes.
You can do it in other materials that have less maintenance, and he can
The
talk about
granite
the way
curving and
home,
everything else, yeah.
about this, but,
Very much dark.
yeah, there's ways to do
But I
this.
guess the question is it with that, particularly with that slide of a raise, is it an effective traffic calming strategy?
We think, actually, the studies show that it is, that people visually, when you see something like this,
You slow down.
you tend to know something special is coming. So I think it is a good idea. I just wanted you to make sure that you do know this is just a bit more expensive.
Well, there's a few things you try to achieve with raising the pavement area up, and one is an aesthetic. Two is to slow things down a little bit. And the third, and which is a very big one, is that it gets up to the level of the curb.
Right.
So you're walking straight across the street and you're not stepping down or up, and there's no trip hazard as well.
And if we think about our disabled population, it's a very easy way to cross the street without doing the cuts and the ups and downs.
When you do it, you also have to think of drainage, how drainage works.
It's interesting with it being right there at the entrance to the parking lot too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has to be, it has pros and cons, but it's the greatest one Rye found, and they don't seem to, it's Rye, that is the maintenance cost.
And the image here on the left shows sort of this little concept of this linear, park or green ribbon would have sort of cutouts somehow, some way to have closets, where little areas for gathering, where people can talk and sit, and that's maybe where shading devices. And, yeah, so there's a little bit of a sort of feel to this as you move down. It's not just a straight linear thing. It has some interest as you move down, and it would be new street lighting, new street furniture, and so forth. Next slide, please. So move down to the south here, and this is 26 Hartford Avenue. This is a vacant site at this point. It is a very narrow site, ranges from about 90 to about 93 feet deep. In looking at some typologies and developing a site plan, we actually did this in AutoCAD. This is just a sketch right here. We feel that it could be conducive to about 8 townhouses ranging in size from 1,800 to 2,000 square feet. Parking would be handled towards the back and the rear, tuck under. Building height, sticking with the current regulations of 3 stories, 45 feet. Residential density a little bit less than what is currently allowed at 15 dwelling units to the acre. And, we have reduced setbacks and yards here to improve streetscape. This is where this zero lot line, setback line side yard came in. And then something else we might think about here, these might be the configurations I'll show you in a section, might be very conducive to live-work units. So on the ground floor, somebody could have a professional office and live above, and these have been successful at many places around the country. Next slide, please. So here we see that configuration where you have a building that is pretty close to the front yard. We call this frontage kind of a terrace frontage. We have sidewalk, a park planting strip, and then you hit Bank Street. Then you have the building itself, and towards the rear, enough room for an alley, and then tuck under parking. That parking sort of goes into the building a little bit, but also allows you to create a patio above it towards the rear. And then next slide, please. And
Nick, can I ask a question about that?
yes, please.
Yep.
I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but where would the guest parking be for these units?
Yeah, we were looking at that, and probably a little bit towards the northern part in that area where we show a lot of trees right now. We'd probably have to fit some spaces in there, or maybe even a couple towards the southern portion. With only 8 housing units, you probably wouldn't need too many. I think in other, they could park also at large in sort of the downtown area.
Okay.
Next slide just shows some, initial sketches of what this would look like to scale from various perspectives, but this gives you a little bit of an idea of what that frontage would look like on the bottom right-hand side with sort of this dressed terrace frontage. Next slide, please. And here are some of the typologies that we have that might be fitting. We're not suggesting that these are the right architectural configurations, but these show buildings at the one on the top right is in Bronxville, and you'll see that's a 4-story building. The one on the bottom right is a 2-story configuration. Then we have a 3-story on the top left, and then the bottom, that is actually a live-work unit, where the parking, the office is on the ground floor, living is above, and then behind in the back, the parking is tucked under.
I think one thing to keep in mind with this concept
Yep.
is that if there's ever an opportunity where some land could be acquired and where you're turning the corner, it's the one in the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah.
Reminds me of that, is that part of this whole exercise is growing part of the center from a physical nature where other parcels could come into play.
Right.
So it's just one thing to keep in mind is when you develop something like that on a narrow strip, does it work in abutting pieces?
Right.
So just to,
It's a good question. I mean, right next to it is a single-family home, right? And there would have to be some buffers, but you're talking about
right,
connections.
if there's ever a connection or ever an opportunity
Yeah.
where those parcels could become available for a larger development,
Right.
then
That back alley, in a way, could connect as well. Is that what you're?
or now what we're seeing is more of a frontage on Hartford Avenue.
Yeah.
So you're seeing
Something
facade,
greater,
you're
some
seeing
greater scale.
something
Yeah.
with a little bit of scale to it, and possibly more cost effective when it comes to the development of something like this. I mean, 8 units,
Yeah.
you really have to do the math.
Yeah, you do.
The smaller the number, the smaller the number of
Yes,
units,
very true.
the math becomes much more difficult.
Yeah, very true.
So I think that also, so if I were, I'd have to go back to path number 412, but is that contiguous, those, as an example, those contiguous lots I don't think they're zone changed, like they're not included in.
I think, by the way, going to that map,
well,
yeah,
right.
those are I think adjacent
Yeah,
are
blue.
single family.
Yeah, it's
No, that
still,
could be.
Yeah.
that
so
could-
just
that could be-
as a consideration, right? If
Right.
we're thinking broadly
Right,
that.
that could be an
I think if
exercise.
you wanted to run that, then we'd have to maybe take a look at that line again, because the back of this lot, that's a zone change.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I don't want to turn everything upside down, but that was the one thing I noticed in the zone change. We stuck with the same lines that exist now that were probably very thoughtfully drawn, but maybe that's something to think about.
Right, but it shouldn't be, we can't look at it as a hard stop, something that may not happen in the future. Because the developer can always come in for a zone change,
True,
so.
fair.
The next slide, please. And these are just very quick. These are the kind of frontages that these buildings create. And this is really very much the same kind of configuration. What you're looking at here is 3 units. You can see the excess on the left and the right, and then a smaller unit down below. So adding to the street. The next image shows what that kind of frontage can look like. This is more of a stoop frontage here. If we go to that next slide, please. More of a stoop frontage. And then go one more slide, please. What we're really talking about is a little bit more frontage and green space, not so quite tight to the roadway on Bank Street. Next slide, please. And then this is just provides an idea of what that tuck under parking would be like on a 3-story configuration. Next slide. So moving up to the north end of Bank Street, we are just did the sketch building of a mixed-use building that would fit in here. There's a couple features that are important. One, it parks itself. Secondly, you can see this right on the corner, there's a slightly higher mass that would sort of serve as the gateway coming in from the east along East Granby Road. And then, very importantly, the setback and the patio in front of the building, sort of in this portion that is more, commercial or retail on the ground floor with residential above. You can see Crosswalk Square there, and then the beginnings of knitting in this pedestrian walkway system that would then match in and connect to the rest of the concept of the circulation pattern. We go to the next slide, it provides some details. So it's about a 1.9 acre site, plus or minus 30 apartments, about 1,300 square foot gross, about 7,000 to 8,000 square feet of retail. That would be more towards the southern portion along the frontage of Bank Street. Parking, shared surface and permanent parking in one portion of the building, netting about 50 spaces. Building height a little bit taller, as Frank was mentioning, 3.5 with 48. That allows us to get a taller first story for that necessary for the retail. Residential density right in the ballpark of that 15, or about 16 here. And so you notice that active streetscape along Bank Street, and then the connection into the pedestrian circulation.
And just quickly, because I forgot something in the zoning discussion, we were thinking you currently have a max of 15 units to the acre, which we think is pretty good. But we're wondering, and we'll get to this later, in how we do all of this, pay for it, and get these incentives, that we could build in an incentive of going from 15 to 18 units if there's a public benefit of some type, such as they're giving us an easement for a sidewalk connection, or, they're providing some extra landscaping or that type of thing, something that meets the designs. It would be contingent on P and Z giving that. It would be discretionary bonus based on P and Z's judgment. So that's why the 16, I think, could work if we write it that way.
Next slide, please. This shows a section, cross-section across the street there. You can see it called out in the two arrows on the left-hand side. But the idea here would be to set the building back a little bit to create a very active frontage. You see across Bank Street, so the configuration of that green linear ribbon that is running up. And so this image of what Bank Street could be with this sort of very active, very much a public life on this street. The building would be retail, commercial on the ground floor, with this sort of patio, and then residential above. Another reason to think about the setback here is not only to provide that active life along the street. We noticed that there's some of these older trees, more mature trees, potential to maintain those is very nice. It's part of that view that you see when you're coming in, just as an option. And again, these are all very preliminary ideas. They're concepts more than anything. And then the next slide shows some configuration of these buildings. This one is in Wilton, Connecticut. It's a great building, but when we were working in Wilton, its fatal flaw is that it's too close to the road. It doesn't give enough for that public life. There's not even enough room to fit in a couple tables there. It's very close up to the sidewalk. And so even though the architecture provides this idea of what the scale of this building could be, its disposition to the street is not what we're showing in the sketch on the left-hand side. There would be more breathing space. There would be more opportunity for this life on the street. Here's a next slide, please. This also happens to be in Wilton and is more of sort of the imagery here, especially on the top photograph where this building is set back. There's a trellis and there's seating and dining, and there's this sort of these active patios. And this happens to be one of the favorite places of people in Wilton. They really do like to go out there and eat. There's restaurants in that building, and it works quite well. And then the next slide is maybe some configurations, again, of what the architecture or this type of building could look like. The top left is in Providence, Rhode Island. I think it's called Capitol Square. Very successful, and quite a nice scale at about 3.5 stories. And the top right is also that's in New England. Another very very different way of looking at it. The idea here is that the range of architectural configurations is quite broad, but these all offer this. They offer this gesture back to the street that would be important, I think, on Bank Street. Skip 2 slides, or go 2 slides, because we have a mistake in there. There we go. And here's sort of a configuration of some of those kinds of spaces along the street where you have active patios. And the next slide is, the efforts of La Figata to do this. And, we would call this tactical urbanism, but it's a great move to do this kind of thing. I mean, this is serving and not only the customers, it's providing life. Unfortunately, if I had my ways, I would move La Figata, just switch these storefronts and move that down to Bank Street and put this right on that side of it. And in this way, it's sort of towards the back rear end of that parking lot. But it's a great effort, and it shows that people are really thinking about this and this demand for this kind of these types of spaces in downtown. Next slide, which brings us, to looking at. Yep.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Yep.
So I think I know the answers to these, but my reason for asking them is for folks who go back and watch this later to make sure everybody is kind of on the same page of what we're talking about here. So the slides that you just showed us over the last 15 minutes or so, with the exception of the one that might have been slightly higher than the density, but all of those would meet the draft or recommended bulk and parking standards that you showed, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So the purpose of this exercise is not to say this is what we're going to get at any one of these particular pieces of property, but to show how the standards might work. You just pulled out two pieces of property to use as an example. You're going to pick two others, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that this isn't necessarily what we'll get or that necessarily what any one of us is thinking about recommending. It's just examples of what could be done under the broader scale recommendations that you've given us.
Yeah, I think that's very true, Mark, and that is for the sketches. I don't know if we could apply this to all of the imagery I showed, the photos. Those are just sort of typologies and precedents, but definitely the sketches are conforming to these regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this is the area along Hartford Avenue where we have Starbucks, and the idea here is to think about, how things are sort of currently configured, where you take the space between the pedestrian realm on the street and the building, and, under some certain configurations at this point, we see that parking's been put there. And so the idea would be maybe to rethink these spaces. And the next slide is just if we go to the next slide, please. It's just sort of a rethinking of that, of looking and seeking out opportunities where buildings face the public realm, where they do their part to contribute to this broader life, this public life in Granby Center. And so we could put parking there, but we could also think about, al fresco dining. We could talk about places for people to gather and accommodate the parking more towards the rear or the side. What's that?
It's actually a fairly wonky parking area.
It's a tough one in and out. Yeah, I agree.
Challenging.
Yeah. The
This
next,
is another example, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is another example of an area where, we don't own any of this property. So we can't do any of this as much as it may make sense to us without the property owners. But this is another example where we might build into our code some incentives for this property owner to do these kind of things in exchange for some ability to develop or redevelop that you may not be able to do. Is that right?
yeah, that's very much so. They can be also incorporated into guidelines to encourage people to think about the importance of that space between the building and the pedestrian realm. But yeah, very much so. This isn't a proposal per se on this property. It's used as an illustrative example.
Because to me, it's one of our biggest challenges is if, and I think we've already talked about this, so I'll be quiet after I say it, is that it'd be neat if this whole area was vacant. And it'd be a lot easier to achieve a lot of our goals. But because it's developed and we have to achieve these things through redevelopment, it's much trickier and much longer term to get some of these things done, I think.
Yeah, very much so. So wrapping up, I only have a few more slides, I promise. Go to the next slide. This next slide just, goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What are the views of this New England frontage, the more rural frontage, as you're coming into the center? And, the idea of maintaining that and protecting that, that's part of the rural character. So this is Salmon Brook Road, south of Granby Center, coming towards Granby Center. The next slide, please. This is Hartford Avenue, east of Granby Center. And the next slide, please. And this is coming in from East Granby Road into Granby Center. The only thing that we thought about here as you're getting closer, if you go to the next slide, considering some additional plantings along those areas. So it works better when these flip very quickly from one another, but adding in some trees to sort of protect that view shed, this New England frontage, until you do get to the center. And then we were talking about, we had that really fruitful discussion, I thought, about, well, what are those right frontages there? Is it 25? Should it be less? And should it be more? But before you get to Granby Center, there is certainly that character that we thought is worth protecting, and in some instances, a little bit of extra planting when you come in here on the left-hand side might help. The last 3 slides, I believe, if we go to the next one, are some initial ideas on street lighting. And thinking again about scale in terms of taller lights on wider streets and shorter sort of luminaire cycles on pedestrian paths, if you will. So if we would take a look at this proposed pedestrian circulation pattern, and you have Bank Street, where we're talking about some new furniture, there we would, on Bank Street, we would have slightly taller lights, and then when you go into the pedestrian network, something smaller that's a little bit more human scale. So that becomes a little bit more of an intimate, and indeed is what it is. It's a sort of a walking path through the center of the main Granby block. Next slide, please. Signage, there's, some good signage. We have nice signs shown in the center at the top. But thinking more broadly about this overall informational signage, a coordinated program, it's one of these sort of visual and aesthetic layers that can be added, and it adds a bit to a sense of place. And then if we go to the next slide, we have some suggestions or ideas for improving the street furniture in terms of trash cans or refuse receptacles. You can see on the left-hand side that those are what are existing. I think there's an opportunity to select something that could be a little bit more attractive as one idea. And similarly, in the next slide for benches. Right, you can see the kinds of benches that you have currently on the left hand, and there's certainly opportunities to maybe improve that. This at the bottom photo is quite attractive. Also, that brick, it sort of reminds me a little bit of what that green ribbon, the paving in those sort of plazas could be like. And the next slide is my last slide. Just this idea of when we start to think about street trees and additional plantings, we should be looking for native species that work well in this environment and will contribute, positively to sort of the bioclimatic environment and so forth. And so this was actually done in consultation with Jeff Rush of RGR Landscape, and we sat down and gave us these recommendations for this part of Granby. And we know that the idea of white oaks are, native culturally here as well. So this idea of building that up. And with that, I thank you for the very long attention that you gave me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your hard work.
Yeah. One thing I do want to, before we close, or go back to Mark's point, question about, because we're thinking about this, and this is going to be an issue for the town, I think. We're suggesting things like sidewalks, lighting, signage, trees, landscaping, but the place is mostly developed. So yes, we want to build in some incentives into the zoning, like going from 15 to 18 units, or maybe an FAR bonus or a square footage bonus. So that if somebody comes into P&Z, you have through site plan approval, they would get an incentive if they do some of these, or give us an easement for the sidewalks. So that's one way to do it. The town can also apply for grants, and as was mentioned earlier, up till now, there have been, a lot of grants for sidewalks. But at some point, also, I think it may come down to the town looking at, can the town in their capital budget consider anything toward sidewalks or toward implementing this? Because it might be, again, Mark's point is a lot of this is developed. So it's going to be hard to get the private sector to do a lot of this. The final thing we've mentioned before is whether you want to create, or this would need a majority vote of the property owners to create their own special services district where they would then tax themselves to do some of these improvements and maintain them. But that is kind of, in the Stanfords of the world, we've got big players to do that. This is a smaller area, and I'm not sure that would happen unless, I always say with the special services districts, there has to be a catalytic player. And I don't know who that is here, but it could be, when we do this work in other spots, I mean, the best one for me is Hartford, Connecticut. We had a client who was Travelers in Etna. And, they said, well, you want to do certain things on the Connecticut River here, we'll contribute X. And then the city, only then did the city say, oh, we'll match that X. So it may be the town at some point might have to give some capital improvements here, some thought to that. I don't know yet. This is something, because at the end of our recommendations, we should probably get into, how do you implement this? So that's the
That's the hard
so
part.
that's the hard part. And
This is the easy part.
Take a minute to go around the table.
Oh,
If there's
yes.
any initial reactions or questions? I know we're kind of getting late, but John,
Yeah.
can we start with you?
So the one thing conceptually, there's a lot of interesting stuff here and that I think makes sense. And when we're having the conversation about size and mass and front yard, side yard, you look at that logically, that makes a lot of sense. And even when I was going through the materials and the two proposals and conceptual ideas, you're going to go like, it's a great adaptation of a currently underutilized space. But the one thing that concerns me is mass, size, and place. And I would love to, because there is nothing in the center of town that's greater than 2 stories. And it was just when you did the conceptual across, like the bird's eye view across the street, I'm like, damn, that's a big building. It would be interesting, and I know it's great, but Arc can do it fairly easily, to do a 3D that drops both of those, your conceptual idea of both of those in those 2 spaces in comparison to everything else would be interesting to look at. My fear is they're going to look like 2 pillars at either end of that street, completely out of place, giving the scale and mass of everything else there. Now, maybe it's a catalyst, I don't know, but I'm looking at it going like, right up until you had that visual, I'm like, yeah, this all makes sense. And I'm like, I don't know if
Well,
it fits.
I'm glad I had that visual
Yeah.
then, because that's what we want to do, is
Yeah.
we want to look at it, and, if others, and we think that concept for the northern site on, the bank site is worth looking at, we could model that out, and we could actually take a look at what you're saying, because we have the 3D model to do that.
And I've got some other little detailed things we don't have to get into tonight. My other curiosity, and I love it because I've perhaps done it a time or two, officializing the vehicle flow behind the plaza and come up between the Sitco and the remainder of the plaza. My question is like, again, size and scope. Can you model that to what that looks like, and whether is that one way? Is that bi-directional travel? Like what fits there? What makes sense in order to, because creating circulation and sidewalks and things like that, I think it makes a ton of sense. But that was the one thing, because of the kind of nebulous tree line, it is fairly tight there.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see what that looks like and how you can make that fit.
Yeah, I think we've looked at it, from walking and so forth, and we have all of this in AutoCAD, which has very precise measurements as best we can, so we can.
Even if it was one way, it would
fit.
still, it would
Well,
still
one way
be,
clearly works.
one way would be really beneficial, yeah.
Yeah, if we can look at the 2-way traffic also. We just need probably 10-foot to 11-foot lanes there.
Yeah, I guess my vision, I'd always thought about it as
One
being
way.
kind of one way,
Yeah.
I didn't know if we had enough room to get in 2 ways.
Probably, well, if you think about it too, there may be still businesses there that take their deliveries through the rear
They
access.
do,
So,
they're holding some things
Yeah.
back,
so
right?
it'd be interesting to see, but I think even one way would alleviate and create circulation where there is.
To a certain degree, it's not that innovative a thought, because people are doing it already.
Yeah, they are doing.
Yeah.
But can we formalize it, can we fit it into a more formalized network that also includes pedestrian circulation?
And again, there's where we need some permission from the property owner.
Right.
Well, to take that to the nth degree,
Yeah.
we were talking about, one of the property owners that you didn't have contact with, but sits smack dab in the middle is, what happens if the post office isn't there? What opportunities does that create? Because it's a very usable piece of property.
Yeah, that's,
And again, that's a whole different ruckus that, well, storefront post office is a thing.
Kathy, do you have anything you want to add at this point? No. Eric?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting drawings and things to look at. I think it all starts with making the zoning more friendly to be able to do stuff. So pictures, it's good to think about.
Abby?
Yeah, just follow up to Eric. I appreciate the deep dive into the zoning regs. I found that very interesting and helpful.
Yeah, all right.
And allow the commission to eventually think about something.
Marty?
And one thing to John's point is, scale and height, is important.
Yep.
And it also has to be, are we willing to allow that on other pieces of property in the center that could be redeveloped into, in 10 Hartford Avenue, I think I've cited that before as a prime example, where that good size structure, that development, that whole plaza could easily and possibly take on another story if you wanted. If they wanted to.
yeah.
If you really wanted,
It could.
if somebody really wanted to do something there. I guess the one thing that I want to touch upon that I don't need to kind of throw a wet towel onto a bunch of things here, but and actually on the agenda, we were going to kind of get into it a little bit about the history of the zoning in the center of town. So what we've kind of have done here, we've gone from the thought of creating 1 or 2 zones versus 3 that are here, plus an historic overlay on top of it, just to complicate things even more.
Yeah.
But now we're into a 4th zone. We actually have 4 now when you look at this. 5? Did I miss one? You did.
Oh, no. 1, 2, 3, 4.
4.
4 zones, right?
5.
Did we always have
So
4?
there's 3
Yeah.
currently.
3 currently,
So yeah,
so now we're at 4.
well, we're replacing the commercial center with, so there would no longer be a commercial center zone.
Okay, I was.
So, yeah.
Okay,
So
Yeah.
4 and then the historic overlay.
right, okay. So, and then the thoughts earlier on that we had or we discussed about the, what this study is centering on is the red area. What we have to be careful of is not shrinking too much of our thought into just the one red area here.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the center, the area in pink is also very important to the center. When you walk into the center, that you identify the center as, those components also.
Yes.
There's some
So-
shops there. And
Right, so, but the thing that we challenge ourselves with, or the reason, or I'll call it an excuse, that we can't try to pull that into, we'll call it a larger red area, is because of the roads, is because of the, so I think, and in trying to scale it down to, so we haven't made much headway with respect to zoning by what is possibly being proposed, right? I mean, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we could be saying to ourselves, how did we come up with all, these 3 or 4 zones in the center of town, which is the same discussion we're having now. How did we come up with 3 or 4 zones that were done, how many years ago? 2009? So it's a bit of a repeat of what we did in 2009. So do we try to look at this and try to go out a little bit more on a limb and say, really, in looking at the center, we really need to drag into this the pink area also.
Yes.
We
Reduce
have to
that.
get over this hump of the traffic and the roadways. We realize it, it's a huge hurdle, but I think it needs to be looked at. I think we may need to look at that a little bit more.
It's a really great thought, and, you know, the key to handling the roads might be something we've already begun talking about, which are setbacks on different kinds of roads.
Right.
Right? But then bringing the pink and the red together as one, and then just saying, look, the roads are really busy, the buildings along those should be set back, but more or less, this is Granby Center. And maybe that is a simplification.
Right, because the elements of creating, you know, within the red,
Yeah.
the elements of creating the more friendly area,
Yes.
pedestrian-wise,
Right,
amenities,
right.
the whole bit, incentives.
Yep.
We kind of need to carry that. We're going to sacrifice the pink area with that type of thinking if we don't try to bring them into it also.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we need to, you know, we need to try to have as much, not as much, but we need to have some connectivity, or almost as much connectivity
Yeah.
within the red as we
Right.
do on the pink side.
Right.
Even though we do have these
Yeah.
raceways that cut through it.
You know, and I think to a certain degree, you know, some of our thinking was like, you know, it's a half step, because at the other side of us, we're arguing for small lot size to allow for, you know, multifamily in that pink area. We're trying
Right.
to embrace that and bring that in.
Right.
But we were keeping it in two separate zones, yeah.
Right.
You can
And looking at
probably
the
gather
uses.
where we started. We started with a comment that Eric made, and that was to do one zone.
Yeah,
That's where we started.
Right.
We started with one zone. The pink and the red are going to be one zone in our minds, because you had given us, Eric, and credit Eric with that idea. But as we got into it and saying to ourselves, but these lots want to be smaller here, we want to connect everything and get, you know, sort of the park once, walk through here. And so it is the roads, you're right. We said to ourselves, how do we, they're just on the other side of the road, I hate to say.
Right.
But
and-
these are high volume, fairly, despite the traffic lights, fairly high speeds coming up to the lights. And that the properties are slightly, we kept it, we called the whole thing Granby Center A and B. But we did feel that this outside area, we can't get interlocking, you know, the real walkway is just going to be a sidewalk. There's not depth. There's no, you know, here you have a really enclosed space. So that was our dilemma. By the way, I'm just sharing where we started.
Yeah, no, I know.
I like,
We start- yeah.
I was
But it
trying
makes-
to trying to do one
Makes
zone.
sense, though, like,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but you're 100% right, that the streets become too much of a convenient excuse. Like, I can think off the top of my head of about 5 other high-functioning, small, compact downtowns that have higher traffic density and volume than what we do. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things, it's a problem if you make it a problem, or you can look at it and go, is it an opportunity to do different things and capture all that area in a contiguous, treat it all the same.
Right.
Because otherwise, right, you're gonna play one side of the road against the other, and that's kind of silly.
Right, and you really need to look at it when it comes to uses.
Yeah,
Are we going to penalize one side of the road versus
For
the
another,
other side?
yeah.
Because they're just.
Which is
happen
kinda
to be on the
silly,
wrong side
right?
of the Track?
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, I think we got to get beyond that now. I think that the center of Granby needs to begin to focus on what uses can cross the road.
And maybe there's,
So-
not to add more work to your plate, but a sketch of something in that area.
I love the sketch.
I can tell.
Give me another sketch.
I do
We're
think,
learners, man.
yeah. Well, and like right now, Bank Street kind of is the focal point. which
That's
I
what it
think-
is, right?
Yeah.
That's where we saw the most opportunity at this point.
Exactly.
You know, and what you're saying, it's not a wet blanket. This is like a warm blanket around the whole thing that helps us move forward.
It's actually just expanding the thing.
Yeah.
Because we do have the same amount of interest and investment on both sides of the road.
True.
Privately. And, tough to argue that, you can't really argue that point, because all you have to do is look at Station 280,
Yeah.
which, which is actually outside of both of those colors.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
blue.
Yeah.
Those will be the people
And then-
coming in.
Those are the.
Right, and, it's a stone's throw to our government municipal buildings, our education center. So, which is, you look even, further down the road, 30 to 40 years from now, there could be even more of a connectivity up to the, more northern part of town.
Yeah.
So I think we need to possibly try to go out a little bit more on a limb,
Okay.
but that's just my take.
And we can also compare it back to the input from the surveys in the workshop and see like, where was Center? Because I do think it was a little bit bigger than this.
Than just that.
Yeah, but we can look. Okay, if we feel comfortable moving on, background and over. What? Oh, yeah, Mark, forgot about you.
Well, that's okay. I can be pretty brief. So, yeah, I think what we have is a pretty good start. Again, remember from my perspective, what we were trying to accomplish is putting something in the place that is a 20-year plan. I just kind of made up 20 years, but it'll take 20 years to actually see it come to its full fruition. And the way I've wrapped my own head around it and the way I talk to constituents about it is, I think we do in our community have a common goal to grow our grand list and grow our capacity to minimize tax increases on our residential developers, right? So our residential property owners. And so I think we've got a great start to do that because there's only so much the government can do. We can look to see where we had hurdles and remove them, and we can look where we might have some capacity to do some limited incentive, and I think what you guys have done is a pretty good start for that. It focuses the potential grand list growth in the area where we have the infrastructure to handle it and where it makes the most sense. I'm okay with one district going forward, if that makes sense. To me, however, there isn't one other thing that distinguishes the pink besides just being on the other side of the roadway, is at least some of those properties are more sensitive because the adjacent uses next to them, right? So the pink provides a little bit of a capacity to do some transition, but I don't think that means necessarily that we have to do two zones. I think you can accomplish that by setback standards and stuff like that. So I'm comfortable where we're at in terms of starting to put the framework around a workable plan for redeveloping our center over the next 25 years or so. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Abby, this is what you were going to go over with us, which is the background and overview of the 2009 adoption of Granby Center Zone,
Sure, so just
and whatever parts you feel are necessary.
Yeah, so keeping it relatively brief, in the packet, there was information with meeting minutes and et cetera, which I think if you read through that provides a really good summary of that. So just high level, in 2005, this goes back to the plan of conservation being developed that recommended the adoption of a mixed-use zone in town center. Following adoption of the 2005 plan, in 2007 and 2008, the Development Commission took on the initiative of looking at the Granby Center area. At that time, it was a mix of the C1, so a commercial, PDM, OP, and R30 zones, so mix of residential and then commercial and office zones. And Marty, you were on the commission then too, so if you want to add anything. But it was a pretty extensive process with Development Commission.
It was, and if memory serves me, it got very complicated, and it was, what ended up kind of happening is, obviously we had to a lot of people hadn't. So that's how we kind of came up with, the 3 or 4 zones that were created, in the center of town. We knew that, down the road that things would have to probably change a little bit and maybe be simplified. But it was just a step in order to try to create some type of, a little bit more activity for the center area. But it's all I can remember. Long time ago.
So planning and zoning, heard from Development Commission. I believe they adopted the regulation that was very similar actually to what was presented to them by the Development Commission after holding a public hearing. And then since 2009, there have just been very minor changes to the regulation. So they've pretty much remained unchanged since then. In 2012, there was an amendment to allow accessory apartments in the CE and CC zones. In 2014/15, there was an application that was denied by the commission. And again, it comes back to the historic overlay and expanding commercial uses allowed within that area, which was pretty interesting reading through that. And that conversation is still very much relevant, I think, as we've heard from some of our historic stakeholders there. And then in 2015, there was, in response to that denial, there was a committee put together to look at the regulations and how to accommodate some commercial uses within the historic overlay portion of the commercial center and the center common zone. So primarily just the properties around the town green. And then just recently in 2019, P&Z approved an amendment to allow mixed-use buildings by special permit in the commercial center zone. So prior to that, mixed use was not allowed there.
Yeah,
So-
and one of the other things that happens where either the Development Commission or Planning and Zoning really didn't take another look at the center zones, because believe it or not, back around 2015 or 16, the state started looking at that area for road improvements. And that's how long it took to do it. And if we remember some of the stories, there was, could they maybe do a rotary in the center of town? So everything was like all over the map with respect to what possibly could be done. So I know from the development standpoint, it was just a big pause because we didn't know what was going to happen with the on the state traffic side, on the state transportation side. So yeah, that's about it.
Well, that's helpful. All right, so action items for the next meeting. I had we wanted to look at the demolition delay. It's a small thing. Townhome ownership was a discussion. We were kind of like, we'll get into that more later, so write that down. And then I know, Abby, you have quite a list there. Does anyone else have something they want to add?
The only thing I would just want to make sure of is we're all set up schedule-wise. We just want to make sure we'll be back to April 30th, if
Yes.
that's all agreed to, because
Yeah.
we like that. And then that we're aiming for a May 28th meeting. It should be a presentation. And then as John said, if we need something in between, we can do it soon,
And that would be mid-month in April.
mid-month in
Yes.
April.
Are there any action items that you can pick up now, or something that we may need to discuss for April 3rd?
Well, the big action item in my mind is just what you just recommended, and that is we're going to look seriously at one zone, and how to do that one zone. I think what Mark raised, it's very, something we face a lot of, and that is where you have an adjacent zone to you, which is residential, say, or heavily residential, and you've got single-family houses near you. We usually will sometimes, and you probably have this in your code, I didn't look at this one. We would put in the code sometimes that there's a little bit of a more setback required if you're adjacent to a residential. If you're adjacent to another zone and there's residential there. or
Screening.
Screening.
Buffering, screening.
I
And
think it's-
another idea too
That's
is requiring the building to step down, has it,
Yeah.
for that little portion that goes into that interface.
Yeah, in our, the landscaping section, there is, some criteria in there that speaks to having a commercial use when it abuts residential. I'm looking, I think it's a 25-foot buffer or something. I can look at that and send you the
That'd be
language.
great, because I think that is a legitimate thing with that, the pink area. We might want to put in something so that adjacent, more sensitive sites, we have some buffering.
Right. And which you'll probably notice around the pink area, you're going to see that there's quite a bit of buffering already.
Yeah.
Natural,
Natural.
I mean, to the west, we have the town hall complex.
Yeah, town hall.
And then we have a cemetery, and we have, so there are some
Yes.
good bufferings that are already kind of naturally in place for us.
Would it be helpful if next time we come back, we have sketched out something for that bank site in terms of, massing it out on the model? Is that something
I think
you would like to see, and we could start thinking a little bit about a sketch along East Granby Avenue?
I think even more like for me, like the 3D model that shows height and mass.
That's what I was talking about.
Height and mass in
Yeah,
comparison
appreciate
to, adjacent, close by, kind of with the scope of the rest of the center would
Yeah.
be interesting to see what
It's,
the
it's
fit.
gonna,
When I said sketch, I meant do it in
Okay.
the 3D model,
Yeah.
yeah, so we could see it.
And even if you can like scroll with it, I know it's kind of hard when you
If
don't
you
have
could
the
what?
program, but like, when you do a rendering, how you can like click in and show the different angles of it.
Yeah.
So that's elaborate, but for that scaling piece, or you could just screenshot it, whatever. but I'm
Once we've
saying
got
that
it,
could
we can
be-
do that, we can, in the PowerPoint, we can
Yeah.
load a quick video.
Yeah,
Or
there you
something
go.
like that.
Yeah. I know that's always helpful.
Okay.
but I think another thing to keep in mind is we might want to sketch something and then show on that sketch perhaps what existing zoning allows. We're not,
point.
we are very, very close to existing zoning. The only thing we're suggesting is instead of three, in a mixed-use building, instead of 3 floors, we're allowing 3.5, get the pitched roof in on 48 feet instead of 45. And the only reason for that is that floor to ceiling height on the ground floor, if you're going to have retail or service, you don't want to just limit it to, floor to ceiling height of 10 feet or something. You want a more generous floor to ceiling height. So it's a little bit more comfortable for the builder to build just a little bit. The other thing I would say, we can do that and show the difference, because I want the public to understand, and we can get to public hearing on the zoning. It's very similar. We are loosening up the zoning a little bit, but it's, in terms of height, mass, and bulk, there's very little difference. And I think we can show that, like just drawing, hey, what would the zoning be here? But the other thing is, if you're not able to achieve at least, your zoning is 3 stories now. I don't want to go backwards. In other words, if you don't allow 2 stories of residential or 1 of commercial, you don't have a viable financial pro forma for most developers. So we need that. We need your current zoning. You need that. Even if someone, in other words, what I'm saying is, almost even if that, John, if that bulk and massing and so on is a little big for you, you also have to think of, if that's big, to go smaller, you got to think of the financial pro forma of an actual property owner.
No,
developer.
I
Yeah.
completely get it. But
Yeah.
again, that
Yeah.
doesn't
No, but we'll show.
doesn't make it right. Like if it's ugly and doesn't fit, then it's
Yeah.
ugly and it doesn't
No,
fit.
I think we'll be able to show. It fits, number 1, and number 2, the ugly portion though is
The design
different.
standard.
That's the
Yes.
design, that's the design guidelines a little bit, yeah. Yeah.
Let's move on to public session. Let's
Mark?
go, Mark, I brought you again.
No, it's okay. So in terms of, for our next meeting too, if you guys can do it, you've already done a lot of the work on the Bank Street site, but I'd love to see you take a representative, one of those 1.5 acre parcels we're talking about on the other side of the street, and do the same thing there. What would a development look like on one of those sites, or redevelopment?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's start with people who are present first. And we are going to set a 2-minute timer. Eric, you have that?
Already?
Okay. And if we have questions, just write them down or as they talk, we'll let them have their full 2 minutes and we'll address what we can.
2 minutes?
3 minutes.
Let's give them at least 3.
It's 3. Standard.
3 minutes? Okay, let's do 3 minutes. We're going to do 3. Yes.
Come on up.
Yeah, come on up. There's a
Get a mic.
microphone over there. Whoever wants to go first, come on up.
Hi, Terry Hahn, 6 Allen Place. You know where that is?
It's in the blue.
That's right next to the townhouses. I'm in adjacent.
Paper street.
Yeah, it's a private drive, okay? Yeah, it's also misrepresented, I think, in your drawings. It's a private drive owned by me, Allen Place, okay?
Name
Allen Place,
Allen Place, right,
right off of Shattuck, okay?
right.
I've lived there since 1992. I've lived in town for a long time. That property on Bank Street was originally a single-family home. It was brought there. It wasn't built there originally. It was transported there sometime in the 60s or 70s or something like that. And was taken down sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, something like that. At the time, that piece of property, although I will keep telling the story and other people will tell that that's not correct, was used for the green space to expand Geisler's. Okay, now, other people will tell you different stories, but that was the story from when I attended those particular hearings at the time, and that's what we were told. It remains a part of the same zoning as the rest of the neighborhood, because of that reason, okay? It's also one of those, I disagree with the 93 feet. I think it's probably only 85 feet wide. And so under the current setbacks in this particular zone, in the zone that is there, it makes it very, very difficult to develop, and I'm clearly understanding that. But that's sort of the history. I would also note just that the Veterans obelisk is my design. I'll give you some history on that one. The Park Place used to go all the way to Hartford Avenue.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
That memorial is specifically located because of the easement as to where Park Place used to be, and significant overhead wires that came into play to figure out where that was going to go. Also, at the time when that was built, there used to be a tennis court on the green. Okay, which would made the green one of the more unique greens in the state of Connecticut, but that was removed, and so now it's a little disconnected, between all the various different places. But that memorial was set specifically as Park Place was taken out of service, and Hartford Avenue was reconfigured, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that was happening at the time. So there's a lot of things going on at that particular location. So there's a reason why Frontier's driveway is the way it was. They actually had DOT reconfigured it because it used to connect to Bank Street, and Bank Street came through. So there's a lot of stuff in that particular area. Just background history. One of the disadvantages of growing up here, I guess, I'm not sure. There's always another story. I would like to start with the things that I thought were good. And what you're coming up with, 25 East Granby Road, exactly what I laid out in my own mind. Okay, it works great. It makes sense. If you go 3 or 4 stories, it's consistent with the height on, across the way in the medical building. There's a reason why you would do that. I would suggest, though, that you want to look better at not just sidewalks, but more outdoor seating. There's no reason why that doesn't happen along Route 20, and especially on the corner You have an opportunity. You took it down on Bank Street when I think you had a better opportunity to do more and to make that work. I do not understand what podium parking is. If you're
Just the
thinking,
building above it.
if you think we're going, that there's any economic viability
Economics,
of
I know,
doing
yeah.
parking underneath a building in Granby,
Yeah,
that's not
yeah,
possible. It's just not going to happen. So I think that worked out nice. I think that would be great. You should know that I am vehemently opposed to rezoning 26, Hartford Avenue.
That's,
Vehemently. That's that
green-
property.
town
That's the
corner
corner.
spot. Yeah.
Okay. The number of things that I just want to make comments about on that particular site plan is you have everybody coming in with their headlights directly towards my house, off of Bank Street. Yes, that's where my house is. Also, in your rendering, as much as I understand renderings and I do it for a living, all the houses, all the trees that you are showing on your rendering would technically be on my property. My property under the current zone would not be allowed to be developed in the same level as what you're doing. I am vehemently opposed to 0 setbacks for townhouses. Everyone should carry the burden of creating adequate buffers, okay? And you're talking about townhouses, which means you're increasing the density, and you don't provide adequate room to turn a car into their garage or to provide any additional parking in that particular, the lot is just too small. On the other hand, I like your idea, and I think that something like that might be kind of fun up on corner of Hungary Road or some of those other pink properties where that would make sense. I question, and nobody uses Bank Street except for us in the neighborhood. People aren't going to come from North Granby Road to use a parklet on Bank Street or up in North Granby. Okay, they just aren't. I think you missed the point. What we need is to show the sidewalks that get you to Geisler's from Bank Street, to show the sidewalks from Hartford Avenue that get you in towards the barn. Those are missing from the ideas of what's happening here. So Geisler's might be willing to give up their parking spaces if you reduce the parking requirements for shopping centers, which I am, again, highly in favor of. I think Frank is absolutely right. All of your commercial numbers are too high for Granby Center. But we're not getting people anywhere. We're creating this little strip that there's nobody. Why are you there? Figure out what you're connecting to. Why doesn't it go up the rest of Hartford Avenue? Well, we're missing the point. It has to at least be a loop. If nothing else, people can walk their dogs in a loop. Otherwise, there's no reason for people to be in that area. And as much as I appreciate everything that came out of the public input sessions and all of that, they were misdirected. Because people aren't going to come from Silver Street to hang out in a park downtown. It has to serve us.
Actually, I think those are really good points. So when we have the next public workshop too, they'll be actually bringing these ideas in a more fully fleshed way. So we'll want you to share that there as well.
Yeah, I would just warn you about the table at the intersection and the driveway into Geisler's. It's usually not quite done like that. Watching people drive in and out of Geisler's is always an interesting experience. They're going too fast, right? As far as they're not really paying the attention to where they're going. They don't turn their signal on until they're already in the intersection, the whole shebang. And I love the idea of the speed table. I think that that's a great thing.
We're showing two options, which we might not have been clear on. One is simply a different surface treatment
Yeah.
without the table.
Understood.
Yeah.
But I
And the other is the
actually
table.
like the table. I think
Yeah.
the table works. I don't think it works at that particular intersection. And whether or not it needs to be there depends on where it is that you want people to go. Because they're not going to congregate at that particular intersection. The only
Right.
time that ever happens is for the Memorial Day Parade, fundamentally, right? Nobody else hangs out there except for us in the neighborhood. I think that, so again, I stress the no side yard setbacks for townhouses. No. Sorry, no.
Can I ask you a question more?
Yeah,
What do you mean there? Because a townhouse by definition doesn't have a side yard.
No, well, right now you're saying no side yard setbacks for townhouses. And in the design that you created, you probably have a 3-foot difference between the road and the property, your back alley and the next property line. That it's just inconsiderate.
Well, you're talking there of a rear yard. We didn't change the rear.
But right now you have no minimum rear yard.
Can I ground this again?
Okay.
These concepts that are in these drawings
Understood.
are
Understood.
purely just conceptual
Right,
discussions.
but I still think,
Yeah, I see what
think
you're saying.
that if you're talking a side yard for a townhouse, really just talking about on the outside edges for the
Outside,
buildings.
yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Yes.
I know what those
Yeah.
are. But depending on where you put it, if there's other residential uses in the area, think about what's already, you have an active, vibrant, existing neighborhood that is Shattuck and Oak Ridge, okay? I don't know why you would want to shatter that or do anything that doesn't appreciate the fact that that exists.
I'm going to stop you, not
Yeah.
for any particular reason other than time, because I'm looking at Zoom and I know that
I
we
just
have
have, I
time,
have
so.
two other things, sorry.
But can we, let's see, I'm trying to think of, let's stop for now and let's move on with everyone just so that we're not here much past 10. But let's, do you have the email for us and can we link them? Can you forward it to
Yeah.
them? So, and if you don't, I'll give it to you after. And
That's
then
fine.
they will get it directly.
All right, with all due respect, I sat here for 3 hours. 3 minutes, go ahead.
You guys-
Turn.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shocker. But, on Ballard 29 Granville Road, in 2019, I was only the third person in 30 years to challenge for the top spot for selectman. And I came in a respectable second, so I landed on the board of selectmen and served for a couple of years. I got my peek behind the political curtain, and it was a bit discouraging, I have to say. It's a pretty small group of mostly unelected people that have been in charge for a while now, and basically, the center looks the way the center looks because of the neglect in the areas of strategy and planning and leadership generally over that time period. And so it's going to be a challenge for us to get out of our own way as a town, I think, to make anything happen. I also have about a 30-year career as a management consultant facilitating large-scale change initiatives inside service organizations. And the reason I wanted to sit here for hopefully at least 3 minutes is to make 2 points. One of the realities of consulting, which you probably know this, is what the client asks for is almost never what the client actually needs. And so one of the art of consulting is sort of reframing the situation and to the extent that you have the flexibility and engagement to do that. And so it was interesting to hear Mr. Fiorentino mention the goal about, reducing the tax burden and all that tonight, because one of the problems I've had with this group is their inability to articulate, the goals. Why are we doing this, right? And so if I have to wait 20 to 25 years to get a presumably negligible dent in my property taxes from whatever additional development we might be able to shoehorn into the little red, maybe the pink spaces, it's likely that it's likely that goal of reducing my tax burden is not particularly meaningful and probably not in line with the expectations of the general citizenry. And so while you guys may get to the end of May and meet the letter of your commitment, of your engagement with the town, you'll have, I think, missed the, service to the, to your real clients, the stakeholders, the residents of Granby. And so I'm saying this in the hopes that you might go back and think of some ways that you can pivot and use your remaining 90 days to perhaps explore some other options and tie a little more specifically your proposals to measurable outcomes and give the residents a bit of a chance to weigh in on preferences of different options and how important certain goals are versus others, right? It's not just about property taxes, it's about, individual and community health. Megan's talked about that from the beginning of the project as well. So there's lots of reasons we could be doing those kind of things. All right, so that's point number one, is what we need in town isn't what they asked you for, I don't think. And so to the extent that you can pivot and accomplish both things by the end of May would be awesome from my perspective. The second reality of consulting is, or the art is, the client is usually either unaware of and or in denial of their own role in creating the problem that they're asking to help solve. And so, again, we have basically a useless plan of conservation and development because everything's in there, so nothing's in there, right? It's the strategy and a little bit of everything. And, it's basically set on the shelf for 10 years. We had a committee that was put together to implement things, and they worked for a little while, and I think by year 3 had petered out, which is about the same time I took office as selectman. And so again, if what you deliver to us is a set of policy, a skinnier set of policy prescriptions specific to the center that they can put on the shelf next to the plan of conservation and development, which is a plan of policy, a set of policy prescriptions which are so vague and all-encompassing that essentially they are meaningless, then you have enabled some of these current folks here to essentially continue to continue prolonging the problem, right? The problem is we aren't going to get to a future state or a vision or whatever with a set of policy prescriptions, vague, hundreds of policy prescriptions. So one of the meetings, the meeting where I met Meg actually was in front of the Planning and Zoning Committee, advocating for a design-oriented plan, if you will. Or it's got to be something that's specific. We can't take 20 or 25 years to implement it. It's got to be something specific that the residents can get in there, sink their teeth into, that they can see and feel and touch and everything else, right? And part of that actually was advocating for having outside consultants come in to help us with this, because we clearly don't have the capability here in town to do this on our own. So, again, if in the remaining 90 days of the project, we can pivot towards something that's more design oriented and more immediately implementable, I think that's more in line with the expectations and the hopes of the stakeholders, the residents here in town. And that's my request and my hope for you guys being here, helping us with this endeavor, and happy to talk more about that.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for your comments.
Yep.
All right, looking at Zoom, I see Maureen, Michael, Nicholas, and Tony. It's kind of far away, so John, you can correct me if I'm.
Mine is right.
Oh, do I have? Is that good? Okay.
Tony.
Tony. Okay, let's start with Tony, because now he's up at the top of the screen. Okay, great.
Hi, I've got a few problems with this. Number one, the townhouses that you want to put over on Bank Street are totally out of place. You're limiting your clientele. You are saying only certain people can move there. If you have a child, you're giving it a meaning to go play in traffic because you're literally in traffic. You've got a lot of trucks that do pull in and out of there all the time. You do have a lot of traffic that does go through Bank Street where they cut through. A lot of people don't really hang out on Bank Street. And I don't see turning our center into a city, because as good as those drawings looked, to me, it looks like a blueback square, Simsbury Route 10. Our traffic in town has doubled. The Station 280 isn't fully online yet, and the traffic coming and going out of there is crazy. The configuration that they did in the center of town hasn't really helped much with the traffic. It's, to me, made it worse. I haven't heard anything about what was it? Who's going to maintain all of this? Who's going to pay for this? Because all of this never helps our taxes. You could sit there and say, and I know, Mark, you said it, where we need to raise our brand list. Well, they said this when they put the Stop and Shop in. It's going to help our taxes. They said it when they put the Grand in. It's going to help our taxes. They said it when they're going to put the 280. It's going to help our taxes. My taxes went up $1,300 last year. And this year, I don't know what kind of a tax rate I'm going to get. So every time you say, oh, we're going to build it, it'll help your taxes, it doesn't. It just causes more services needed, more maintenance to be done, more hiring of people, and that includes paying them out of our taxes. So there are a lot of good things in this, but I don't really see too much because the cost of it, the parking, the traffic, the sewer, who's maintaining it, all of this costs money. Every bit of it. And all these sidewalks that you want to put in, I get what that woman was saying before. There is no interloop. There's nothing. But you also have to understand, you can sit on Bank Street for a week, and I'll bet you won't count more than 20 people walking. Because most people don't hang out down there. Like she said, from Silver Street, they're not going to come and hang out in the center of town. People don't hang out. This is a quiet, rural, sleepy town. It always has been. It's out of the circle of the loop of West Hartford and everything else. We're just a drive-through sleepy town. We moved out here because it was rural. We moved out here because it was quiet. We didn't move out here to bring Hartford, Bloomfield, West Hartford, whatever, into our town. And every time we get a Granby Living magazine, the first paragraph, we moved to this wonderful little town of Granby that's rural, quiet, and a great place to raise a family. But building it up like this is not going to give people that quiet situation. It's going to make it look like a city. It's going to kill our traffic even more. I sat on Route 20 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it took me a half an hour to get through. So I drive it every day. It is not going to help. I'm telling you right now. And most of these buildings and properties that Mark said we don't own, I can't see how the owners would go for it because we don't even have most of the buildings in this town rented. When we rent them, they move out just as fast as they come in. There's one over by the road up there, over by Sitco next door in the village. That one, Westfield Bank used to be there. They have not been able to rent that out for I can't tell you how many years. Companies don't last here. We couldn't even keep a McDonald's here or a Dunkin' Donuts. So I don't see how you're going to put in retail and then this and that. It's just not going to work. We don't have that type of clientele here. And people just drive through. They don't just stop. Starbucks hasn't been full in a long time. People go in, they leave. They don't sit around. So I don't see how this is going to help us or anything. I thought bringing you guys in was going to make the town look pretty and, desirable, not a cement city.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Maureen. I think your hand's up.
She's muted.
Oh, you're still muted.
There we go.
I think that'll work.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a couple of comments. I want to start with the parking spaces that you're thinking about implementing. And I assume you know this, but each of the proposed townhouses or apartment buildings need access to having dumpster provisions. You need to have a space for EVs. You need, of course, to have handicap parking. Where you're proposing to put the townhouses on Bank Street, Again, think of ambulances, fire departments getting in and out of there. Secondly, I'd like to agree with both Glenn and Mark in that we need to proceed cautiously. I say cautiously in terms of thinking short-term as well as long-term. This isn't going to be a development that just happens, in 5 years or so, but much longer than that. And some of that is due to having an appreciation for what all these changes will bring in the way of taxation, as Tony said, for infrastructure improvements, additional employees, services. There's also the sewer capacity that needs to be assessed. I don't know if you've seen the report on that, but that's another consideration. So I think you need to think both short-term and long-term and do things baby steps at a time. I think the report just leaves out some things that, again, I know the survey that was done, and I know how the committee put together the posters with the pictures and everything else. But, so that gave you some input, I guess, in terms of what people were looking for when they put their red, yellow, and green dots. Kind of a unique way to do it. But again, you're a group of people, and I don't know if you hear or have heard from people other than, myself and Terry Hahn and Tony. But think baby steps, think realized goals. How are you going to measure those goals? We need to see that in order to be convinced that we need to pay for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Michael?
Hey, good evening, everyone. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So, most all of this, in my opinion, with the exception of expanding the center green space, has been incredibly disappointing. We've totally missed the mark. We're not Stanford. We're not West Hartford. Individuals at this table are refusing to acknowledge Granby as a small rural community and desperately trying to develop it into something it is not. It's not only insulting to the townspeople who have built their lives here, but also incredibly fiscally irresponsible. We are unable to produce a balanced budget without increasing the tax burden on town residents as it is. Any modifications to Granby Center should serve its current residents. Changing zoning laws opens the town up to incredible vulnerability. Have we not learned, or have we already forgotten, from the near vessel disaster on Hartford Avenue just 6 months ago? The recommendations of these consultants do nothing but serve the politicians who are pushing their own agendas and lining the pockets of out-of-state developers, as we see time and time again across communities in Connecticut. This is the best we can propose, that we have failed the townspeople and wasted taxpayer money on a consulting study that totally ignores the wants and needs of the town. Why are we so desperate to degrade the charm of Granby? What is the true motivation behind this upheaval of Granby's current culture and lifestyle? These are the questions that everybody here and everybody present for the meetings moving forward needs to ask themselves. And we need to be transparent with the townspeople, because nothing that was discussed tonight is reflective, I'm fairly confident, reflective of the wants and needs of the townspeople. And if all these things and services and new buildings that we plan on putting up are only going to increase the tax burden, then we have really gone down the wrong path yet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I believe we have Nicholas, if you want to speak.
He's being shy.
Oh, well,
He's with us.
great. Can still speak. Do we have everyone who wanted to speak on there? Okay, well then we are going to close out our public discussion and I'm going to adjourn our meeting. Can I get a motion to do that?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for your work tonight, everyone.
Thank you.